Hello, friends. Welcome to the Sleep Aliens. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Commander Lucas Avery pressed the play button on the portable VHS player mounted on the wall of Mir's Cavant 2 module and watched as the screen flickered to life. The timestamp in the corner read 03:47:22 GMT, November 9th, 1991. Outside the reinforced window to his left, Earth's terminator line stretched like a seam connecting night and day. 10 minutes had passed since it crossed into darkness. The station would remain in the planet's shadow for 45 minutes, completely deprived of sunlight. This was Avery's third space mission, but his first on Mir. He had spent the previous 6 months in the space shuttle program, which had been sufficient time to acclimate to the necessary adjustments for space, and walking had begun to feel like a distant memory. But Mir was different. It was older, it creaked in ways never heard before in a space shuttle. The air smelled metallic, like old coins forgotten in a drawer, and the Russians, his crewmates, behaved with a silent superstition he had learned not to question. Sofia Kuznetsova floated beside him, her eyes fixed on the monitor. She was 38, a veteran of 2 previous Mir expeditions, and she had the kind of calm that came from spending years in an environment where panic could kill you. Her hair, tied back in a loose ponytail, drifted slightly in the cabin's gentle airflow. She said nothing as the footage played, but Avery noticed her fingers tighten around the handhold. The external camera feed showed the view from Mir's starboard docking port. Blackness. The kind of blackness you only find in space, absolute and total, broken only by the faint glow of distant stars. The station's solar arrays were retracted for the pass, standard procedure to avoid thermal stress. The Earth below was invisible, cloaked in its own shadow. For a moment there was nothing but void. Then, at 03:48:7, something changed. A light appeared in the upper left quadrant of the frame. Small at first, no larger than a pixel, but growing. It moved with purpose, not drifting like debris or tumbling like a discarded panel. It accelerated smoothly, crossing the camera's field of view in a diagonal trajectory that brought it closer to the station. The light was white, almost bluish, and it pulsed, faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat translated into photons. Avery leaned forward. "You seeing this?" Sofia nodded slowly. "I saw it when it happened, real time. And you didn't report it." "I did." Her voice was flat. "They told me it was a reflection." "Reflection of what? We're in Earth's shadow." She didn't answer. On the screen, the light continued its approach. It was close now, close enough that Avery could make out a shape behind the glow. Not spherical, not cylindrical. Something irregular, asymmetric, with edges that seemed to bend light around them. The object passed within what Avery estimated to be 200 meters of the station, close enough to trigger proximity alarms if it had been tracked by radar. But there had been no alarms, no warnings. Just this silent visitor, gliding through the dark like a ghost. The timestamp advanced. 03:48:19. The object slowed. For 3 seconds it held position relative to Mir, matching the station's velocity with precision no natural object could achieve. Then, without warning, it accelerated again, shooting off at an angle that would have torn apart any craft using conventional propulsion. The light flared once, bright enough to overexpose the camera's sensors, and then it was gone. The frame returned to blackness. Stars. Silence. The tape ended. Avery exhaled slowly. He realized he'd been holding his breath. "How long have you had this?" "Since it happened, 3 days after the pass, they asked me to hand over the original. Said it needed to be reviewed by the technical team. I made a copy first." She tapped the VHS deck. "This one." "And the original?" "Erased. Officially, it never existed. The report I filed was reclassified as a light refraction event caused by ice particles on the camera lens." "There are no ice particles in a vacuum." "I know." Avery stared at the blank monitor. His mind raced through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. He'd been trained to think analytically, to solve problems with data and logic, but the data here didn't fit any framework he knew. The object's trajectory suggested intelligent control. Its proximity to Mir was too precise to be coincidental, and the way it moved, accelerating without visible thrust, defied the basic principles of orbital mechanics. "Why show me this now?" he asked. Sophia turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet urgency. "Because it's happening again." The first incident had occurred during Expedition EO9, Sophia's second mission aboard Mir. She'd been assigned to conduct routine maintenance on the external cameras, a task that required her to monitor the feeds from inside the station while ground control ran diagnostics. It was tedious work, the kind that filled the long hours between experiments and exercise routines. But on the night of November 6, 1991, during a dark side pass over the Pacific, she'd seen something that changed the way she looked at the void. She described it to Avery in careful detail, speaking quietly as they floated in the dim light of the Cavant 2 module. The station's life support system hummed softly in the background, a constant white noise that you learned to ignore after the first week. Outside, Earth turned beneath them, invisible in its own shadow. The object had appeared without warning. One moment, the camera feed showed nothing but stars and the curved edge of the planet's terminator line. The next, there was light. Not a streak, like a meteor burning through the atmosphere. Not a steady glow, like a satellite reflecting sunlight. This was something else. Pulsing, deliberate, moving in a way that suggested awareness. Sophia had called out to her crewmate, Commander Anatoly Volkov, who floated over to the monitor and watched in silence. Together, they observed as the object approached Mir, slowing as it neared the station's docking module. It held position for several seconds, close enough that Sophia swore she could see details, ridges or panels on its surface, though the resolution of the camera made it impossible to be certain. Then it moved again, circling the station in a slow arc before accelerating away into the blackness. Volkov had been unimpressed. "Debris," he'd said, his tone dismissive. "Something from an old launch. Jettisoned panel, maybe." But Sophia knew better. Debris didn't maneuver. It didn't pulse with light. And it certainly didn't match velocity with the space station orbiting at 27,000 kilometers per hour. She filed a report with Mission Control the next morning. The response came back within hours, terse and bureaucratic. The footage had been reviewed. The object was identified as a reflection caused by ice crystals on the camera lens, likely formed from outgassing during a recent wastewater dump. No further investigation was warranted. The tape was to be handed over to the technical team for analysis. Sophia complied. She had no choice. But before she sent the original down with the next Progress supply ship, she made a copy. It was a small act of defiance, one that could have cost her career if discovered. But something about the way Mission Control had dismissed her report so quickly, without question or follow-up, told her this was a story that needed to be preserved. Now, 3 years later, she was telling that story to Lucas Avery, an American astronaut who'd arrived aboard Mir as part of the Shuttle Mir program. He'd been on the station for 6 weeks, long enough to grow familiar with its rhythms, its quirks, its silences. But he hadn't yet learned what Sophia had discovered during her time in orbit, that some things in space were better left unspoken. "You said it's happening again," Avery repeated. "What do you mean?" Sophia reached into a storage locker and pulled out a small notebook, its pages filled with handwritten entries. She flipped to a recent page and handed it to him. 3 nights ago, dark side pass over the Indian Ocean. I was monitoring the external cameras during a routine systems check. Same thing. A light moving toward the station, holding position, then disappearing. Avery scanned the notes. Sophia had documented everything. The time, the coordinates, the duration of the sighting, even a rough sketch of the object's trajectory. It was meticulous, the work of someone who knew their observations would be questioned. "Did you report it?" "No. Why not?" She looked at him with an expression that was almost pitying. "Because I know how it ends. They'll tell me it's nothing. They'll erase the footage. And they'll make sure I never fly again." Avery understood. In the astronaut corps, reputation was everything. One false report, one perceived lapse in judgment, and you'd find yourself grounded, reassigned to a desk job while younger, more reliable candidates took your place. The pressure to conform, to stay within the lines, was immense. But so was the weight of what Sophia was suggesting, that something unknown was visiting Mir, and the agencies responsible for their safety were choosing to ignore it. "Show me the footage," he said. They waited until the next dark side pass. Avery positioned himself at the observation window in the Cavant 2 module, while Sophia monitored the external camera feeds from the control panel. The station was quiet, the rest of the crew asleep in their sleeping bags, velcroed to the walls of the core module. Outside, the sun had just dipped below the horizon, plunging them into the 45-minute night that came 16 times a day in low Earth orbit. Avery pressed his face to the glass. The view was breathtaking, as it always was. Below, the Earth was a vast expanse of darkness, broken only by the faint glow of cities along coastlines and the occasional flicker of lightning storms over the oceans. Above, the stars burned with a clarity impossible to see from the ground, undimmed by atmosphere or light pollution. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of diamond dust. For a moment, he allowed himself to forget why he was here. This was the dream, the reason he'd spent years training, enduring centrifuges and isolation tests and endless simulations, to float here, weightless, surrounded by the infinite. It was humbling and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Then Sophia's voice crackled through the headset. "Lucas, camera 3, upper left quadrant." Avery shifted his attention to the monitor mounted beside the window. The feed from camera 3 showed the same view he'd seen on the tape, the starboard docking port framed against the blackness of space. At first, there was nothing unusual. Just stars and the faint curve of Earth's limb, barely visible in the reflected light of the moon. Then he saw it, a light, small but distinct, moving against the backdrop of stars. It pulsed, the same rhythmic flicker Sophia had described, and it was getting closer. Avery's pulse quickened. He grabbed the handhold beside the window and pulled himself closer to the glass, his breath fogging the surface. "You see it?" Sophia asked. "I see it." The object was approaching Mir from an oblique angle, its trajectory smooth and deliberate. As it neared, Avery could make out details that the camera couldn't capture. The light wasn't uniform. It seemed to emanate from multiple points on the object's surface, as if it were covered in small emitters or panels. The shape behind the glow was difficult to discern, but it looked angular, almost geometric, with edges that didn't quite align with any design Avery recognized. It moved closer. 200 meters, 150. Avery felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever this was, it was real. solid. Not a reflection, not debris, not a trick of the light. It was here, in orbit with them, and it was watching. The object slowed as it reached Mir's perimeter. For a moment, it held position, matching the station's velocity with eerie precision. Avery could see it now through the window, a dark shape silhouetted against the stars, its lights pulsing in a pattern that felt almost communicative. He wanted to reach out, to touch the glass, as if that would somehow bring him closer to understanding what he was seeing. Then, without warning, it moved. The object accelerated in a direction that defied logic, shooting off at a 90-degree angle from its original trajectory. No rocket plume, no visible thrust, just instantaneous motion, as if the laws of inertia didn't apply. The lights flared once, brilliant and blinding, and then it was gone. The frame returned to darkness. Stars. Silence. Avery floated in the stillness, his mind struggling to process what he'd just witnessed. Beside him, Sophia's voice came through the headset, quiet and steady. "Now you see why I didn't report it." The debriefing room at Johnson Space Center smelled like stale coffee and recycled air. Lucas Avery sat across from Dr. Raymond Keller, the mission psychologist assigned to evaluate returning astronauts for signs of stress, disorientation, or what the agency politely called perceptual anomalies. It was 3 weeks after Avery's return from Mir, and this was his 4th session. The first 3 had been routine, discussions about readaptation to gravity, sleep patterns, emotional responses to re-entry. But this one felt different. Keller adjusted his glasses and glanced at the file open on the desk between them. "I want to talk about the incident report you filed, the one regarding the unidentified object near Mir." Avery had expected this. He'd filed the report within 24 hours of the sighting, following protocol to the letter. He'd included timestamps, coordinates, camera footage references, and a detailed written account of what he and Sophia had observed. He'd even attached Sophia's notes, the sketches and data she'd collected over multiple sightings. The report was thorough, professional, and impossible to dismiss as the product of fatigue or hallucination. "What about it?" Avery asked. Keller leaned back in his chair, his expression carefully neutral. "The technical review team concluded that what you observed was likely a piece of orbital debris, possibly a discarded panel from a previous mission. The pulsing light effect you described is consistent with tumbling motion causing reflective surfaces to catch sunlight intermittently. We were in Earth's shadow. There was no sunlight. Reflected moonlight, then, or light from the station itself." Avery fought to keep his voice level. "Doctor, I've been in space 3 times. I know what debris looks like. This wasn't debris. It maneuvered. It held position relative to the station, then accelerated in a way that violated basic orbital mechanics. Debris doesn't do that." Keller made a note on his pad. "I understand your frustration, but you have to appreciate the position we're in. Without corroborating radar data or additional eyewitness accounts, it's difficult to substantiate claims of anomalous behavior. The camera footage you referenced has been reviewed, and the technical team found no evidence of controlled flight. Because they erased it." The words hung in the air. Keller's pen stopped moving. He looked up slowly, meeting Avery's gaze. "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth. Sofia Kuznetsova experienced the same thing 3 years ago. She filed a report, handed over the original tape, and it disappeared. The official explanation was ice crystals on the lens. When I filed my report, I made sure to note the exact timestamp and camera number. But when I requested a copy of the footage for my records, I was told it had been overwritten during routine maintenance. Routine maintenance is standard procedure for not 3 days after a documented sighting. Someone wanted that footage gone, and you know it. Keller set down his pen and folded his hands on the desk. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its clinical detachment. "Lucas, I'm going to be frank with you. There are aspects of spaceflight that we don't fully understand. Strange visual phenomena, electromagnetic interference, sensory distortions caused by radiation exposure. These things happen, and when they do, we have to be careful not to jump to conclusions that could undermine public confidence in the program. So, you're saying I imagined it. I'm saying your perception may have been influenced by factors beyond your control. Fatigue, prolonged isolation, the stress of operating in an environment where even small mistakes can be fatal. These aren't weaknesses, Lucas. They're human responses to an inhuman environment." Avery stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I didn't imagine it. Sophia didn't imagine it. And if you'd bother to look at the data instead of burying it, you'd know that." Keller remained seated, his expression sympathetic but unmoved. "I believe you saw something, but whether what you saw represents an actual external phenomenon or an internal perceptual event, that's what we're here to determine." The meeting ended shortly after. Avery left the building feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. He'd known the report would be questioned, possibly dismissed, but he hadn't expected the erasure to be so blatant, so coordinated. Someone, somewhere in the chain of command, had decided that this information was too dangerous, too disruptive to be acknowledged, and that meant someone knew more than they were saying. Sofia Kuznetsova's email arrived 2 days later. It was brief, written in the careful English she'd perfected during her years working with international crews. "Lucas, I hope you are adjusting well to Earth. I heard you filed a report. I am not surprised by the response. They did the same to me. If you want to know more, there are others who have seen what we saw. I can introduce you, but we must be careful. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed. Think about it. Sophia." Avery read the message 3 times before responding. He knew what she was offering, a network of astronauts and cosmonauts who'd encountered similar phenomena and been silenced, officially or otherwise. It was a rabbit hole, one that could cost him his career if he pursued it. But the alternative, accepting the official explanation and moving on, felt like a betrayal of everything he'd witnessed. He typed a single word in reply: "Yes." The meeting was arranged for the following month, during an international aerospace conference in Montreal. Sophia would be there as part of a panel on long-duration spaceflight, and Avery was invited to attend as a guest speaker. It was the perfect cover. No one would question 2 former crewmates catching up over coffee between sessions. But when Avery arrived at the designated cafe, he found more than just Sophia waiting for him. There were 5 of them in total, seated around a corner table far from the windows. Sophia made the introductions. First was Colonel Yuri Glazkov, a veteran of 2 Soyuz missions who'd served aboard Salyut 6 in the late 70s. Next to him sat Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, a Japanese payload specialist who'd flown on the shuttle in 1994. Across the table were Commander Patricia Rimes, a NASA astronaut with 4 shuttle missions under her belt, and her colleague, Dr. Marcus Okonkwo, a mission specialist who'd spent 6 months on the ISS. They all had the same look, guarded, wary, but determined. These were people who'd seen something they couldn't explain and had been told, in one way or another, to forget it. Glazkov spoke first, his English heavily accented but clear. "You filed a report. That took courage. Most of us learned not to after the first time." "What happened to you?" Avery asked. The older man smiled grimly. "Salyut 6, 1978, we were conducting a routine EVA when I saw something move past the station. Not debris. Not another spacecraft. Something that glowed like your object. I reported it to Mission Control, and they told me I was seeing reflections from my helmet visor. But I knew what I saw, and so did my crewmate, though he denied it later when they pressured him. Patricia Rhymes leaned forward. STS-73, 1995. We were in the payload bay, deploying a satellite, when one of the cameras picked up an object trailing us. It stayed with us for nearly an hour, maintaining the same orbital parameters, then shot off at a speed no satellite could match. I asked the ground team about it during the next comm window, and they said it was a classified military asset. I didn't believe them, but I let it go. What else could I do? Dr. Nakamura added his own experience. A sighting during a shuttle mission where an object approached the orbiter and circled it twice before vanishing. Marcus Okonkwo described a similar encounter aboard the ISS, lights outside the station that moved with purpose and intelligence, observed by multiple crew members, but never officially documented. Each story was different in its details, but identical in its outcome. Reports filed, footage confiscated, official explanations that didn't hold up under scrutiny, and quiet pressure to move on and forget. "Why do they cover it up?" Avery asked. "If this is happening regularly, if multiple crews are seeing these things, why not investigate properly?" Sophia answered, "Because acknowledging it means admitting we don't control our own orbital space. It means admitting there's something out there, watching us, and we have no idea what it is or what it wants. That's not a narrative any space agency wants to promote." Glaskov nodded. "And there's another reason. If the public knew, if the politicians knew, there would be demands for answers we don't have. Missions would be delayed. Funding would be questioned. The entire space program could be jeopardized by the fear of the unknown." "So they bury it," Avery said quietly. "They bury it," Patricia confirmed. "And they bury anyone who insists on digging it up." The conversation continued for another hour, each person sharing what they knew, what they'd pieced together from fragmented reports and whispered conversations with other astronauts. A pattern emerged. The sightings were more common during dark-side passes when the station was in Earth's shadow and external cameras were less likely to capture clear images. The objects varied in size and shape, but they all displayed characteristics inconsistent with known spacecraft or debris: controlled flight, sudden acceleration, and the ability to match orbital velocity with precision. Some in the group believed the objects were extraterrestrial in origin. Others thought they might be classified military projects, drones or surveillance platforms using propulsion systems beyond publicly acknowledged technology. A few entertained the possibility that they were something else entirely, phenomena related to space itself, glitches in the fabric of reality that became visible only in the extreme conditions of orbit. But they all agreed on one thing: the official explanations were lies, and the erasure of evidence was systematic, deliberate, and ongoing. As the meeting broke up, Sophia pulled Avery aside. "There's something else you should know. After I showed you that tape, I went back to check on the copy I made. It's gone. Someone accessed my storage locker aboard Mir and took it. I don't know who, but it means they're watching us more closely than we thought." Avery felt a chill. "Are we in danger?" "I don't think so. They don't want martyrs, but they'll do everything they can to discredit us, isolate us, make sure our stories never gain traction. So we have to be smart. Document everything, but keep it hidden. Talk to each other, but only in person, never over phones or emails they can intercept. And most importantly, don't give them a reason to ground you. If we're not flying, we can't see what's up there." She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a USB drive. "This contains copies of everything I've collected over the years. Reports, notes, recordings. I've given the same to the others. If something happens to one of us, the rest can keep the information alive. Consider it insurance. Avery pocketed the drive. "Thank you." Sophia smiled sadly. "Don't thank me. You're part of this now, whether you want to be or not. And once you start seeing the patterns, once you understand how deep the silence goes, you'll never look at the sky the same way again." Back in Houston, Avery threw himself into training for his next mission. The agency had assigned him to a 6-month rotation aboard the ISS, scheduled to launch in 18 months. It was a coveted assignment, one that normally would have filled him with excitement. But now every briefing felt tainted, every technical document suspect. He found himself questioning everything, wondering how much of what he'd been told about life in orbit was true, and how much was carefully curated to avoid uncomfortable questions. He also began his own investigation, quietly, carefully, using the resources available to him without drawing attention. The USB drive Sophia had given him contained a wealth of information. Dozens of incident reports filed by astronauts over the past 4 decades, many of them stamped with classifications like resolved, natural phenomenon, or insufficient data for analysis. But reading between the lines, the pattern was unmistakable. Something was out there, and it had been observed repeatedly by trained professionals whose credibility should have been beyond question. One report in particular caught his attention. It was dated March 1982 and filed by a Soviet cosmonaut named Valentin Lebedev, who'd spent 7 months aboard Salyut 7. During a routine observation session, Lebedev had seen what he described as an orange cloud approaching the station. The cloud had expanded as it drew near, eventually enveloping the entire station in a glowing mist. Lebedev and his crewmate had experienced a brief period of disorientation, and when the cloud dissipated, they found that several hours had passed, though it felt like only minutes. The official explanation was a hallucination caused by fatigue and prolonged exposure to microgravity. But Lebedev had maintained until his death that the experience was real, and that something had interacted with the station that day, something beyond human understanding. Avery cross-referenced Lebedev's account with other reports and found similar descriptions scattered throughout the archives. Objects that appeared as clouds or mists, phenomena that caused time distortions or electromagnetic interference, encounters that left crew members shaken but unable to provide concrete explanations. It was as if space itself was playing tricks on those who ventured into it, revealing glimpses of something vast and incomprehensible before retreating back into silence. But there was another thread running through the reports, one that disturbed Avery more than the sightings themselves. In several cases, astronauts who'd filed detailed accounts of anomalous phenomena had later retracted their statements or refused to discuss the incidents publicly. Some had been reassigned to ground duties shortly after their missions. Others had left the astronaut corps entirely, citing personal reasons or health concerns. It painted a picture of systematic suppression, not through overt threats, but through subtle pressure, the kind that made clear that certain topics were off-limits, certain questions unwelcome. Avery realized he was walking a tightrope. He needed to keep flying, to keep observing, but he also needed to avoid the fate of those who'd pushed too hard and been sidelined. So he played the game, attending debriefings with a smile, accepting the official explanations without argument, and keeping his growing collection of evidence locked away on encrypted drives hidden in his apartment. He also stayed in touch with the others, the small network of astronauts who knew the truth. They communicated through careful channels, meeting in person when possible, exchanging information through dead drops and coded messages. It felt absurd, like something out of a spy novel, but the stakes were real. If the agencies discovered what they were doing, their careers would be over. And yet, for Avery, there was no going back. He'd seen what he'd seen. He knew what he knew. and he was determined to find out what was really happening in the silence of orbit, no matter how long it took. The International Space Station hung against the black like a cathedral of aluminum and solar arrays. Lucas Avery floated in the cupola module, 7 windows arranged in a hemisphere that offered a panoramic view of Earth and the void beyond. It was his 4th month aboard the ISS, and he'd learned to cherish these quiet moments, when the rest of the crew was asleep and he had the observation deck to himself. Outside, the planet turned beneath him in slow majesty. They were passing over the Pacific, the ocean a vast expanse of darkness broken only by scattered points of light from ships and distant islands. Above, the Milky Way stretched across the sky in crystalline clarity, each star a sun with its own family of worlds, its own mysteries. He thought about the others, the astronauts he'd met in Montreal. Patricia Rhymes was back on Earth now, medically retired after a diagnosis of early-onset osteoporosis that conveniently ended her career just months after she'd started asking questions about funding for UFO investigation protocols. Marcus Okonkwo had been reassigned to a desk job at Marshall Space Flight Center, his request for a second ISS rotation denied without explanation. Hiroshi Nakamura had returned to Japan and gone silent, his emails to the group bouncing back with address not found errors. The pattern was clear. The network was being dismantled, slowly and carefully, each member isolated or removed until only Sophia and Avery remained active in the astronaut corps. And Sophia's next mission had been postponed indefinitely due to what Roscosmos called budgetary constraints. Avery knew he was being watched. Not overtly, not with cameras in his quarters or overt surveillance. But there were small signs, delays in his email access, casual questions from Mission Control that probed a little too deeply into his personal activities, the way certain conversations in the crew lounge would pause when he entered. He'd become a person of interest, someone the agencies wanted to keep tabs on. But they couldn't stop him from looking out the window, and they couldn't control what he might see. The dark side pass began at 02:17 GMT. The sun disappeared behind Earth's curve, plunging the station into shadow. Avery activated the external cameras, routing the feeds to the cupola's displays. He'd made this part of his routine, monitoring the cameras during every pass, documenting anything unusual. Most nights brought nothing, just the slow rotation of stars and the occasional piece of debris tumbling past at a safe distance. But tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, a quality of waiting that Avery had learned to recognize. He'd felt it aboard Mir, just before the object appeared. He felt it now. At 02:23, the camera on the station's nadir port captured something. A light, faint but distinct, rising from Earth's atmosphere. It moved slowly at first, then accelerated as it climbed, shedding the glow of atmospheric friction as it entered the vacuum of space. Avery's pulse quickened. He zoomed the camera, enhancing the image as much as the system allowed. The object was spherical, roughly 10 meters in diameter, with a surface that seemed to shimmer like liquid metal. It emitted no exhaust, no visible propulsion signature. It simply rose, defying gravity with effortless grace, until it reached the station's orbital altitude. Then it stopped. Avery watched, transfixed, as the sphere held a position 300 meters below the ISS. It wasn't matching the station's velocity, it was hovering, suspended in space as if orbital mechanics didn't apply. The impossibility of it made his mind rebel. Everything he'd learned about spaceflight, about physics, screamed that what he was seeing couldn't exist. But there it was. The sphere began to pulse, its surface rippling with waves of light that moved across its circumference in patterns that felt almost linguistic. Avery grabbed his personal tablet and started recording, capturing every frame, every detail. If this footage disappeared like the others, he wanted his own copy, something they couldn't erase. The pulsing continued for 90 seconds. Then, without warning, the sphere began to move again. But this time, it didn't accelerate away. It rose, slowly and deliberately, climbing toward the station. Avery's breath caught. It was coming closer, much closer. He keyed the internal comm. "Houston, ISS. We have an unidentified object approaching the station. Distance approximately 200 meters and closing. Requesting immediate telemetry check." The response came after the standard 3-second delay. "ISS, Houston. We show no objects in your vicinity. Can you describe what you're seeing?" "Spherical object, metallic surface, approximately 10 meters diameter. It's rising from below, matching our altitude. Distance now 150 meters. A pause. Longer than transmission lag would account for. ISS, please confirm you're observing this on external cameras, not through the window." "Confirmed. Camera feed is on my display. I can also see it visually through the cupola." Another pause. When the voice returned, it belonged to someone different, someone whose tone carried authority Avery didn't recognize. "Commander Avery, this is Capcom. We need you to cease external observations and return to the crew quarters. We're seeing some anomalous readings on our end that may indicate a sensor malfunction." "This isn't a sensor malfunction. The object is real. It's solid. Commander, that's an order. Return to crew quarters and await further instructions." Avery didn't move. The sphere was 70 meters away now, close enough that he could see details on its surface, patterns that looked like circuit traces or hieroglyphs, flowing and reforming in configurations that hurt to look at. The light it emitted had taken on a bluish cast, bathing the interior of the cupola in an otherworldly glow, and then he heard it. A sound, faint but unmistakable, coming through the station's hull. Not mechanical, not random. It was structured, rhythmic, almost musical. A series of tones that rose and fell in patterns that felt deliberate, intentional. The sphere wasn't just approaching, it was transmitting. Avery's hands moved on instinct. He grabbed his personal recorder, a small digital device he used for mission logs, and held it against the cupola's window. The sound was clearer here, vibrating through the glass with a resonance that made his teeth ache. He recorded for 30 seconds, then a minute, capturing audio that he knew would be impossible to explain. The sphere held position at 50 meters. This close, Avery could see that its surface wasn't solid. It was made of something that shifted between states, solid and liquid, matter and energy. And within that shifting surface he saw shapes, geometric forms that rotated and interlocked like the gears of an impossibly complex machine. "Commander Avery, respond." The voice on the comm was sharper now, edged with concern. "Are you returning to crew quarters?" "Negative, Houston. I'm documenting this. Whatever it is, we need a record." "Commander, listen to me very carefully. What you're experiencing may be a hallucination caused by..." Avery killed the comm link. He'd heard enough. They were going to gaslight him, erase this like they'd erased everything else. But not this time. This time, he had proof. The sphere began to descend. The tones shifted, becoming deeper, more resonant. Avery felt them in his chest, in his bones, as if the sound was bypassing his ears and speaking directly to some deeper part of his nervous system. And with the sound came something else, a presence, a sense of being observed not just by cameras or sensors, but by something intelligent, something aware. He found himself thinking words he hadn't intended, concepts that formed in his mind without conscious effort. "We are explorers. We watch. We record. We do not interfere. But we are here. We have always been here. The sphere pulsed once, brilliant and overwhelming. Avery's vision whited out. When it cleared, the object was gone. The camera feeds showed nothing but stars and the distant curve of Earth. The sound had stopped. The cupola's interior was dark again, lit only by the faint glow of display screens. Avery floated in silence, his heart pounding. He looked at the recorder in his hand, saw the red light still blinking. It had captured something. He didn't know what, but it was there, preserved on a device that wasn't connected to any network, couldn't be remotely accessed or erased. The comm crackled back to life. ISS, Houston. We're showing all systems normal. Commander Avery, do you copy? He took a breath, steadying himself. Copy, Houston. I'm here. Can you confirm your status? We lost telemetry for approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds. The encounter had felt longer, much longer. But time was fluid up here, especially during dark side passes when your circadian rhythm had nothing to anchor to. I'm fine. Systems appear normal from my end. Copy that. We're going to run a full diagnostic on the external cameras. In the meantime, please proceed to crew quarters for a medical check. Understood. Avery pocketed the recorder and pulled himself out of the cupola. As he floated through the narrow corridors of the ISS, he thought about what had just happened. The sphere. The transmission. The overwhelming sense of presence. He'd been closer to whatever was out there than anyone he knew, close enough to feel its attention, to hear its voice, and he understood now why the agencies buried these encounters. Because acknowledging them meant acknowledging that humanity wasn't alone, that we shared our orbital space, perhaps our entire solar system, with intelligences beyond our comprehension. It meant admitting that for all our technology, all our achievements, we were still children playing in a sandbox while giants walked past, barely noticing us. The medical check was cursory, a formality. The flight surgeon found nothing wrong, no signs of hypoxia or neurological distress. Avery was cleared to return to duty, though he noticed the way the surgeon's eyes lingered on him, the way the questions probed gently at his mental state. They were looking for cracks, reasons to ground him, to end his mission early. He gave them nothing. He smiled, answered questions with calm professionalism, and showed no sign of the turmoil beneath the surface. But that night, alone in his sleeping bag with the lights dimmed and the station humming around him, he listened to the recording. The tones were there, captured in surprising clarity. They rose and fell in patterns that definitely weren't random, weren't the product of mechanical vibration or atmospheric interference. They were a signal, a message, though in a language no human had ever decoded. Avery copied the file to 3 separate storage devices, each hidden in different parts of his personal gear. Then he began the slow process of analyzing the audio, looking for patterns, repetitions, anything that might offer a clue to its meaning. He worked in stolen moments, during exercise periods when he was alone on the treadmill, during meal times when the rest of the crew was occupied elsewhere. He also reached out to Sophia, using a communication method they'd established, a personal email account accessed through a relay that made tracking difficult. He told her what he'd seen, what he'd heard. Her response came 3 days later. Lucas, be careful. If they know you recorded something, they'll find a way to take it from you. But if what you captured is real, if it's genuine communication, then we have something they can't deny, something that could change everything. Guard it with your life. And when you come home, we'll find a way to share it, not with the agencies, with everyone. Avery read the message twice, then deleted it. Sophia was right. This wasn't about convincing NASA or Roscosmos anymore. They'd had decades to come clean, and they'd chosen silence. No, this was about the public, about humanity's right to know that we weren't alone, that something was out there, watching, waiting, perhaps even trying to communicate. But first he had to survive the rest of his mission. And that meant playing the role of the model astronaut, the reliable professional who saw nothing unusual, heard nothing strange, and filed no reports that might raise uncomfortable questions. He returned to his duties, conducted experiments, performed maintenance, participated in public outreach events where he smiled for cameras and talked about the wonder of space exploration. And every night, during the dark side passes, he watched the windows, monitored the cameras, and waited. The sphere didn't return, but Avery knew it was out there. They were out there. And now, for the first time, he had proof that might withstand the erasure, the gaslighting, the systematic suppression. It was a small thing, a digital recording on a device barely larger than his thumb. But it was real, and it was his to protect. 6 months later, Avery returned to Earth. The re-entry was routine, the Soyuz capsule parachuting into the Kazakh steppe under clear skies. He was extracted, debriefed, and subjected to the usual battery of medical tests. Everything checked out. He was healthy, mentally sound, ready for reassignment. But he knew his career in space was over. It came in the form of a reassignment letter delivered 2 weeks after his return. He was being transferred to the astronaut office's education division, a position that would involve public speaking, school visits, and promotional work. It was described as a reward for his exemplary service, a chance to inspire the next generation. But Avery understood what it really meant. He was being sidelined, placed somewhere he couldn't cause trouble. He accepted the reassignment without protest. There was no point in fighting. They'd made their decision, and nothing he said would change it. But he still had the recording copied and hidden in multiple locations, and he still had connections to the others, those few who remained willing to speak truth to the silence. Sophia reached out to him a month later, suggesting they meet. Not at a conference this time, but somewhere quiet. Somewhere they could talk without being overheard. They chose a small cafe in Montreal, the same one where they'd first gathered with the others. This time, it was just the two of them. "I'm being forced to retire," Sophia said, stirring her coffee without looking up. "Medical reasons, they say. My bone density is too low for another mission. But I had a full physical 6 months ago and everything was fine." "They're cleaning house," Avery said quietly. "Yes. Everyone who knows too much. Everyone who won't stay silent. We're being removed, one by one." She finally looked at him, her eyes reflecting a sadness that went beyond personal loss. "But we still have what we know, and we have your recording." Avery nodded. "I've been thinking about what to do with it. If I release it now, they'll claim it's fabricated, CGI, anything to discredit it. But if we can build a case, compile enough evidence from enough sources, then maybe people will listen. Or maybe they'll dismiss us as conspiracy theorists and move on," Sophia said. "You know how this works, Lucas. The truth doesn't matter if people don't want to believe it. Then we make them want to believe it. We tell the story. Not just the facts, but what it means. That we're not alone. That something extraordinary is happening in orbit. And the agencies responsible for our safety are choosing to hide it instead of investigating it." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was a hard drive, its casing worn from years of handling. "This contains everything I've collected. Every report, every interview, every piece of evidence I could gather. It's yours now. I'm done fighting, but you're still young, still credible. If anyone can make people listen, it's you." Avery took the drive, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "What will you do?" "I'll go home to Russia, spend time with my family, try to remember what life was like before I started looking up." She smiled sadly. maybe that's the real curse of seeing what we've seen. You can never go back to not knowing. The sky is different now. Every star feels like a question. They talked for another hour, sharing memories of their time in space, the beauty and terror of orbital flight, the moments of transcendence that made all the risk worthwhile. When they finally parted, Avery knew it might be the last time they'd see each other. Sophia was going silent, disappearing into retirement where the agencies couldn't touch her. But her legacy, their legacy, would continue in the evidence they'd preserved, in the stories they'd documented, in the truth they'd refused to let die. Avery returned to Houston and began the work of organizing everything Sophia had given him. It was a vast archive, spanning decades of encounters, hundreds of reports, testimony from astronauts and cosmonauts whose names would shock anyone familiar with the space program. These weren't fringe figures or attention seekers. These were pioneers, heroes, people who'd risked their lives to expand humanity's reach into the cosmos. And they'd all seen something. All been silenced. All been told to forget. But Avery wouldn't forget. He'd find a way to tell their story, to share what he'd captured, what they'd all witnessed. Not for fame or validation, but because it mattered. Because the question of whether we're alone in the universe deserved an honest answer, not a bureaucratic cover-up. The recording sat on his desk, copied to multiple drives, encrypted and secured. Sometimes, late at night, he'd play it back, listening to those strange tones, feeling again the presence of something vast and incomprehensible. And he'd think about the sphere, hovering outside the ISS, watching him through 7 layers of glass and vacuum. We are here. We have always been here. The message wasn't meant to terrify. It wasn't meant to threaten. It was simply a statement of fact, delivered by an intelligence so far beyond human understanding that communication itself was an act of grace, a bridge extended across an impossible gulf. And one day, Avery believed, humanity would be ready to cross that bridge, ready to accept that the universe was far stranger, far more populated than we'd ever imagined, ready to look up at the night sky and see not just stars, but possibilities. But until that day came, he would keep the evidence safe, keep the stories alive, and keep watching the sky, waiting for the moment when silence finally gave way to disclosure. The Mir 91 recordings exist in fragments now, scattered across hard drives and encrypted files, guarded by those few who still remember what it meant to see the impossible and be told it never happened. Some of those recordings may surface one day. Others may remain hidden, lost to time, or deliberately destroyed by those who fear what they represent. But the truth persists. In the testimony of astronauts who refuse to recant. In the gaps in official records where entire incidents have been erased. In the strange lights that still appear during dark side passes, observed by crews who know better than to report them. Space keeps its secrets, but secrets like light from distant stars have a way of reaching us eventually. We just have to be patient enough to wait and brave enough to look when they finally arrive. Sleep well, and if you dream of orbital passes and spheres of light, remember, some dreams are memories of truths we've forgotten. And some silences speak louder than any words ever could. Welcome back to the quiet dark. Tonight, we return to orbit, to the International Space Station, where astronauts live suspended between Earth and infinity. In that metal sanctuary, 400 kilometers above the surface, strange things sometimes happen. Systems fail without explanation. Sensors detect readings that shouldn't exist. And occasionally, when the sun rises for the 16th time in a single day, someone sees something they can't explain. This is the story of Module 3 and the silence that fell over the ISS during a routine solar panel inspection in March 2009. A silence that began with electromagnetic readings no one could account for, and ended with a voice on the recording system saying a single word before cutting out completely. As you drift toward sleep, ask yourself what that word meant and what was approaching. Now close your eyes, float weightless in the dark, and listen. Dr. Neil Carter pulled himself through the narrow corridor connecting Node 2 to the laboratory module, his movements practiced and economical in the microgravity environment. 6 months into his second rotation aboard the ISS, he'd long since stopped thinking about the mechanics of moving through the station. Your body learned to float, to push off surfaces with just enough force to carry you where you needed to go without bouncing off the opposite wall like a billiard ball. The lab was quiet this morning, if morning was even the right word when the sun rose every 90 minutes, and your circadian rhythm existed only as a carefully managed fiction. The rest of the crew was scattered throughout the station. Commander Sandra Morrison conducting experiments in the Destiny module, Flight Engineer Yuki Tanaka performing maintenance on the life support systems, and Aaron Vogel, the electrical systems specialist, somewhere in the depths of the power management subsystems. Carter floated to the observation port and pressed his face close to the reinforced glass. Outside, Earth turned beneath him in shades of blue and white, the Terminator line visible as a soft gradient where day met night. They were approaching the Dark Side Pass, that 45-minute window when the station slipped into the planet's shadow and the temperature outside dropped to minus 150 degrees Celsius. He'd always loved these moments, the transition from light to dark, the way stars suddenly became visible with shocking clarity once the sun's glare faded. There was something profound about watching day and night cycle so rapidly, a reminder that all the boundaries humans drew, dawn and dusk, morning and evening, were just constructs we imposed on the universe's indifferent rotation. His tablet beeped, pulling him from his thoughts. A message from Aaron Vogel flashed on the screen. "Neil, can you check the solar array telemetry? Getting some weird readings on panel 3B. Probably just sensor drift, but want a second set of eyes." Carter tapped a response. "On it. Give me 5 minutes." He pushed off from the window and glided to the workstation mounted against the lab's forward bulkhead. The computer was already logged in, displaying a cascade of data streams from the station's various systems. He pulled up the solar array monitoring interface and scrolled through the readings for panel 3B. Aaron was right. The numbers were off. The panel was registering voltage fluctuations that didn't match the expected pattern for their current orbital position. Not huge swings, nothing that would trigger an automatic alert, but consistent deviations from the baseline that suggested something was interfering with the panel's photovoltaic cells. Carter frowned and expanded the time series, looking for patterns. The fluctuations had started approximately 37 minutes ago, just as the station was entering its previous Dark Side Pass. During the pass, they'd diminished but not disappeared entirely, which was strange because solar panels in Earth's shadow should produce essentially zero output. When they'd emerged back into sunlight, the fluctuations had resumed, stronger than before. He keyed his comm. "Aaron, I'm seeing what you're seeing. Voltage is dancing around like we've got a loose connection somewhere, but the diagnostics aren't showing any hardware faults." Her voice came back after the brief lag of the station's internal communication system. "Yeah, that's what's bugging me. Everything checks out on paper, but the panels are acting like they're being hit with some kind of interference. Could be debris impact? Maybe we took a micrometeorite hit and it damaged the surface. Checked that, no impact alerts, and the cameras aren't showing any visible damage. But there's something else. Come down to the power module when you get a chance. I want to show you something." Carter logged the anomaly in his duty report and made a note to request a detailed inspection of panel 3B during the next scheduled EVA. Then he pushed off toward the power management section, a cramped compartment 2 modules aft, where Erin spent most of her waking hours monitoring the complex web of systems that kept the station alive. He found her floating in front of a rack of diagnostic equipment, her dark hair tied back in a ponytail that drifted slightly in the gentle air current from the ventilation system. She was 36, a decade younger than Carter, and this was her first mission to space. But she'd adapted quickly, showing the kind of calm competence that made her popular with the rest of the crew. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an oscilloscope display showing a waveform that pulsed in regular patterns. I set up a spectrum analyzer on the panel's output, trying to isolate the source of the interference. What you're seeing is the electromagnetic signature around 3B. Carter studied the display. The waveform was regular, almost too regular, pulsing at approximately 1.7 Hz with remarkable consistency. That's not random noise. No, it's not. And here's the weird part. Erin tapped a few commands, and the display split to show 2 waveforms side by side. This is the signature from 3 hours ago, and this is now. The frequency is stable, but the amplitude is increasing. Increasing how much? About 3% per hour. At that rate, we'll start seeing actual power delivery issues in the next 6 to 8 hours. Carter felt a prickle of unease. In space, anomalies were never good news. Every system aboard the ISS was designed with redundancy and fail-safes, but that didn't mean things couldn't go wrong. And when they did, the consequences could be catastrophic. "Have you reported this to Houston?" "Sent them the data 20 minutes ago, waiting to hear back." She glanced at the chronometer on the bulkhead. "We're about to enter another dark side pass. I want to monitor the signature during the pass, see if it behaves differently when the panels aren't generating power." "Makes sense." "Mind if I stick around?" "Actually, I was hoping you would. You're the astrophysics guy. If this is some kind of natural phenomenon, solar radiation or cosmic ray flux or something, you'd know better than me." They floated in companionable silence as the station slipped into Earth's shadow. The transition was abrupt, sunlight vanishing as if someone had thrown a switch. Outside the small porthole near Erin's workstation, the view shifted from the blue brilliance of the planet to the infinite dark of space scattered with stars. Carter watched the spectrum analyzer. The waveform continued, unchanged by the absence of sunlight. If anything, it seemed to grow slightly stronger, the peaks rising higher on the display. "That's not solar interference," he said quietly. "Solar phenomena would drop off during the shadow pass." "I know." Erin's voice was tight. "So what is it?" Before Carter could respond, the lights in the power module flickered. It was brief, no more than a second, but unmistakable. They looked at each other, and Carter saw his own concern reflected in her eyes. "That was probably unrelated," Erin said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "Probably." The spectrum analyzer's display suddenly spiked, the waveform jumping to nearly double its previous amplitude before settling back to the slowly climbing baseline. At the same moment, Carter felt something he couldn't quite describe, a sensation like pressure change, the way your ears pop during an airplane descent. But that was impossible in the station's carefully regulated atmosphere. "Did you feel that?" he asked. Erin nodded slowly. "Like the air pressure changed, but the gauges show normal. Check the external sensors. Temperature, radiation, anything that might account for..." The lights flickered again. Longer this time. A full 3-second dropout that plunged them into darkness before the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the module in dim red. The spectrum analyzer went blank, then rebooted, its startup sequence scrolling across the screen. Carter keyed his comm. "Houston, ISS. We're experiencing power fluctuations in the electrical module. Lights are dropping out intermittently. Investigating now. No response. He tried again. "Houston, ISS, do you copy?" Silence. Not even static. Just the complete absence of signal that meant their communication downlink had failed. Erin was already at the backup systems panel, her fingers flying over the touch interface. "Primary comm is down. Backup isn't responding either. I'm showing loss of signal on all downlink channels. What about internal comms?" She tried keying the ship-wide intercom. "Commander Morrison, this is Vogel. We've lost contact with Houston and experiencing power anomalies. Please respond." Nothing. Carter felt his pulse quicken. Communication failures were rare on the ISS, and when they happened, they were usually brief, caused by satellite handoff glitches or temporary atmospheric interference. But losing both primary and backup systems simultaneously, along with internal comms, suggested something more serious. "We need to get to the command module," he said. "Check the main communication array." They pulled themselves through the connecting passages, moving quickly but carefully. In microgravity, panic was deadly. You couldn't run, couldn't rush without risking injury. Every movement had to be controlled, deliberate. The station felt different now. Quieter, somehow, though that didn't make sense since the ambient noise from the life support systems and cooling fans was constant. But there was a quality to the silence that Carter couldn't name, as if the station itself was holding its breath. They found Commander Morrison in the Destiny module, floating near the main communication console with a confused expression on her face. "Comms are dead," she said as they approached. "I've tried every channel, every frequency. Nothing. It's like someone just switched us off." "How long?" Carter asked. "Started about 2 minutes ago. Yuki is checking the external antenna arrays now, seeing if we took a debris hit or something." Erin pulled up the system diagnostics on a nearby console. "Power management shows normal. All systems are receiving adequate voltage, but I'm still seeing those weird EM fluctuations on panel 3B, and they're getting stronger." Morrison's expression hardened. She was a veteran of 3 ISS expeditions, the kind of commander who remained calm in a crisis because panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. "Show me." Erin brought up the spectrum analyzer data on the main display. The waveform was now clearly visible, pulsing with machine-like regularity at 1.7 Hz, and the amplitude had jumped again, now reading 40% above baseline. "That's not random interference," Morrison said quietly. "That's a signal." The three of them stared at the display. Carter's mind raced through possibilities. Solar activity could produce electromagnetic signatures, but not with this kind of regularity. Cosmic ray impacts could cause power fluctuations, but again, not in organized patterns. Military satellites sometimes leaked radiation in their operational frequencies, but this was unlike any signature he'd seen in the reference databases. "Could it be a malfunction in our equipment?" Morrison asked. "The analyzer itself generating false readings." "I thought of that," Erin replied. "But the power fluctuations are real. The lights flickered. The voltage regulation systems are working overtime to compensate. Something is definitely affecting panel 3B, and the analyzer is just showing us what." A voice crackled over the internal comm, startling all of them. Yuki Tanaka, calling from the airlock module. "Commander, I'm at the external camera station. You need to see this." They pulled themselves to the nearest monitor, and Yuki patched through the feed from one of the station's external cameras, this one mounted near the solar array junction. The image showed panel 3B in stark clarity, the photovoltaic cells reflecting the faint light from Earth below. But there was something else. A distortion in the space around the panel, subtle but visible, like heat shimmer rising from pavement on a summer day. The shimmer pulsed in rhythm with the waveform on the spectrum analyzer, expanding and contracting with mechanical precision. "What the hell is that?" Morrison whispered. Carter leaned closer to the screen, his training as an astrophysicist warring with the evidence of his eyes. "It looks like a localized field effect, some kind of energy interaction with the panel's surface. Caused by what?" "I don't know." The shimmer intensified, growing larger, extending outward from the panel until it encompassed nearly a quarter of the array structure. And as it grew, the communication systems flickered back to life, filling the command module with a burst of static before going dead again. Aaron checked the spectrum analyzer. Signal strength just jumped again. We're at 60% above baseline now. "Recommend we orient the station," Carter said, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut. "Put some distance between us and whatever that is." Morrison nodded. "Agreed, Yuki. Get ready to fire the attitude control thrusters. We're going to rotate the station 180 degrees. Put the panels on the opposite side of our orbit vector." "Copy that, Commander." But before Yuki could execute the maneuver, the shimmer expanded one final time, ballooning outward until it enveloped the entire solar array. The spectrum analyzer's display went completely white, the signal strength pegging at maximum. Every light on the station flickered in unison, and for a brief instant, Carter felt that pressure sensation again. Stronger this time, as if something was pressing against the hull from outside. Then, everything went dark. Complete, total darkness. No emergency lights, no console displays, no ambient glow from Earth below. Just blackness, and the sudden deafening silence as every system aboard the ISS shut down simultaneously. Carter floated in the dark, his breath loud in his ears, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was impossible. The station had multiple redundant power systems, backup batteries that should have kicked in immediately. But there was nothing, just the void and the terrible knowledge that they were now adrift in space with no power, no communication, no way to call for help. Then, in the darkness, he heard a sound, a voice, barely audible, coming from somewhere in the module. Neil Carter's own voice, though he wasn't speaking. It was a recording, playing back through some system that still had power, some isolated circuit that the blackout hadn't touched. And it was saying a single word over and over. "Approaching, approaching, approaching." The darkness lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Carter would learn this later, when they reviewed the automatic logging systems that had continued running on isolated battery backup. But in the moment, floating blind in the black, it felt like hours. The recording of his voice continued to loop, that single word echoing through the module. Approaching, approaching, approaching. He had no memory of saying it, no memory of when it might have been recorded. But there it was, his own voice warning them of something none of them could see. Then, as suddenly as they'd failed, the systems came back online. The emergency lighting flickered to life first, bathing the command module in red. Then the console displays booted up, their startup sequences scrolling too fast to read. The life support fans spun back to operational speed, and the familiar hum of the station's mechanical heartbeat resumed. Within 30 seconds, every major system had restored itself, as if the blackout had never happened. Commander Morrison was the first to speak. "Status report. Everyone check your stations." Erin pulled herself to the power management console, her fingers moving rapidly across the touch interface. "Primary power is back. All distribution nodes showing green. Battery reserves at 87%, which is consistent with a 4 to 5 minute total draw." "Communications?" Morrison asked. Carter checked the comm panel. "Downlink is active. I'm receiving carrier signal from Houston, but no voice traffic yet. Internal comms are operational. Yuki, what's your status?" The flight engineer's voice came through clearly now. "All good here, Commander. Attitude control systems are online. We maintained stable orientation throughout the blackout." Morrison exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Okay, before we do anything else, I want a full diagnostic on every critical system. If we've got a power management fault that can cause a complete shutdown like that, we need to identify it now." But even as she spoke, Carter was studying the communication logs, and what he found made his blood run cold. "Commander, you need to see this." He brought up the audio recording system interface on the main display. The ISS maintained continuous recordings of all voice traffic, both internal conversations and comm exchanges with Houston, stored in rolling 30-day buffers. Carter had pulled up the timeline for the blackout period and played back the last few seconds before systems failure. His own voice filled the module, clear and steady. "Houston, ISS. We are observing an unidentified energy phenomenon near solar panel 3B. Amplitude is increasing. Recommend we," then static, followed by the blackout. But there was something else. In the moment before the static, in the background of Carter's transmission, there was another sound. Low and resonant, almost below the threshold of hearing, but definitely present. It sounded like a tone, or perhaps multiple tones layered together, rising and falling in complex harmonics. Erin listened to it 3 times, her expression growing more troubled with each playback. "That's not ambient noise. That's too structured, too organized." "Could it be interference from the EM signature?" Morrison asked. "Maybe. But I've never heard electromagnetic interference that sounded like that. It's almost—" She trailed off, searching for the right word. "Musical," Carter finished quietly. "It sounds almost musical." They fell silent, listening to the playback again. The tones were there, undeniable, weaving through the recording like threads of sound that didn't belong. And beneath those tones, if you listened carefully, there was something else, a rhythmic pulsing that matched the 1.7 Hz frequency they'd observed on the spectrum analyzer. Morrison made a decision. "Copy all of this to secure storage, multiple redundant backups. Then we're going to write up a detailed incident report and send it to Houston the moment we reestablish voice contact. This is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "This is beyond anything in our training protocols." As if on cue, the comm panel chimed, indicating an incoming transmission. Carter accepted the link, and suddenly the module was filled with multiple voices speaking over each other, urgent and concerned. "ISS, Houston, do you copy? ISS, this is Capcom, please respond." Morrison keyed the transmit button. "Houston, ISS, we copy. Commander Morrison here. We experienced a complete systems failure approximately 5 minutes ago. All systems have since restored themselves. Crew is safe, station is stable." The relief in the Capcom's voice was palpable. "Copy that, ISS. We lost all telemetry from you for just over 4 minutes. Can you describe what happened from your end?" Morrison launched into a concise summary of the events, the electromagnetic anomaly, the power fluctuations, the communication failure, and finally the blackout. She left out the part about the tones in the recording, the shimmer around the solar panel, and Carter's mysterious warning. Those would be included in the written report, but over an open voice channel with dozens of controllers listening, there were things better left unsaid until they had time to analyze the data properly. "Understood, ISS," the Capcom responded after a brief consultation with the flight director. "We're showing all your systems nominal from here now, but we'd like you to run a full diagnostic suite, priority on power management and communications. We'll be standing by to receive your detailed report." "Copy, Houston. Will do." The connection held for another few minutes as they coordinated the diagnostic procedures. Then Houston signed off to give them room to work. The moment the link closed, Morrison turned to Carter and Aaron with an expression that was part concern, part fascination. "Okay, before we send that report, I want to know everything. What exactly did we just experience?" Carter pulled up the external camera feed, the one that had shown the shimmer around panel 3B. The image was clear now, the solar array looking perfectly normal, no distortion, no energy field. But when he rewound the recording to the moments before the blackout, the shimmer was there again, pulsing in time with those mysterious tones. "Whatever this was," he said slowly, "it was localized to the solar array. It generated an electromagnetic field strong enough to interfere with our power distribution systems. And it was transmitting something, either intentionally or as a side effect of whatever process it was undergoing." "Transmitting to who?" Morrison asked. "Or to what?" "I don't know, but there's something else." Carter pulled up the recording of his own voice, the one that had played during the blackout. "I need to find out when this was recorded, because I don't remember saying it." Aaron accessed the audio system's metadata. According to the timestamp, this was recorded at 06:46:52 GMT, which is... She checked the chronology. "Approximately 15 seconds before the blackout, you were standing right here in this module." Carter tried to remember. He'd been watching the camera feed, seeing the shimmer grow larger. He'd said something to Morrison about orienting the station. And then, nothing. No memory of speaking the word approaching. No memory of activating a recording system. "Play back the internal camera footage from that time frame," Morrison ordered. They pulled up the video, a grainy black and white feed from the security camera mounted in the corner of the command module. There was Morrison at the main console, Aaron at the power station, and Carter floating near the communication panel. The timestamp showed 06:46:45. As they watched, Carter on the screen suddenly went rigid, his head tilted back slightly, as if he were listening to something. His lips moved, forming a word they couldn't hear on the silent video feed. Then he reached out and activated the voice recorder, speaking directly into it. "Approaching." He said it 3 times, his expression blank, almost trance-like. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the moment passed. Carter on the screen blinked, looked confused, and turned back to the camera feed as if nothing had happened. The timestamp read 06:46:58. 6 seconds later, the blackout hit. In the present, Carter stared at his own image, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the station's temperature. "I don't remember any of that." "You looked like you were in some kind of fugue state," Aaron said quietly, "like you were responding to something we couldn't hear." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Okay, new priority. Before we send anything to Houston, I want a full medical scan on Neil. Blood work, neurological assessment, the works. If there's any possibility this was a medical event, a stroke, or seizure or something, we need to rule it out." Carter nodded, though he knew what they'd find. He'd felt fine before the blackout, felt fine now. There was no headache, no confusion, no symptoms of neurological distress. Whatever had happened to him, it wasn't medical. It was something else, something connected to the phenomenon outside. The medical bay was a cramped section of the station barely large enough for one person to work comfortably. Yuki Tanaka, who had emergency medical training, conducted the examination while Morrison and Aaron continued running diagnostics on the station's systems. Yuki took blood samples, checking Carter's oxygen levels, glucose, electrolytes. Everything came back normal. She performed a basic neurological assessment, testing his reflexes, coordination, cognitive function. Again, normal, Finally, she used the portable ultrasound to examine his brain, looking for any signs of stroke, hemorrhage, or abnormal activity. "I'm not seeing anything concerning," she said, reviewing the images. "Brain structure looks normal. No signs of acute trauma or vascular events. Your vitals are all within expected ranges for someone 6 months into a mission. Whatever happened, it doesn't appear to have left any measurable physiological effects." "But something did happen," Carter said. "I recorded a message I don't remember recording. That's not normal." "No, it's not. But from a medical standpoint, I can't find a cause." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There are documented cases of transient global amnesia, where people lose memory of specific events without any underlying pathology. It's rare, and usually triggered by stress or extreme physical exertion. Could that explain this?" Carter considered it. TGA was a real phenomenon, well documented in medical literature, but it typically involved hours of memory loss, not 6 seconds. And it didn't explain why he would record that specific message, that specific word, as if he were warning them about something. "I don't think so," he said finally. "This felt more like I was compelled to do it, like something external was influencing my actions." Yuki's expression grew troubled. "You understand how that sounds." "I know, but I'm telling you what it felt like." She made notes on her tablet, documenting the examination and Carter's subjective report. "I'm going to recommend we monitor you closely over the next 48 hours. If you experience any similar episodes, any gaps in memory or unusual behavior, you report it immediately. Understood?" "Understood." He returned to the command module to find Morrison and Aaron hunched over a data display, their expressions grim. "What did you find?" he asked. Morrison gestured to the screen. "We pulled the telemetry from the solar arrays, looking at the performance data from the hour before the blackout. Panel 3B was definitely behaving abnormally, but here's what's interesting. The EM signature we detected, it wasn't being generated by the panel itself." "What do you mean?" "I mean the panel was responding to an external source. Something was broadcasting that signal from outside the station, and the photovoltaic cells were picking it up like an antenna." Carter felt his pulse quicken. "From where?" Aaron brought up a trajectory analysis. "Based on the signal strength and directionality, the source was approximately 300 meters from the station, positioned along our orbital path. It was ahead of us, and we were moving toward it at 7.66 kilometers per second." "Was?" Morrison repeated. "Past tense?" "The signal cut off at the exact moment of the blackout. Since then, nothing. It's gone." They stood in silence, absorbing the implications. Something had been out there, positioned in their orbital path, broadcasting an electromagnetic signal powerful enough to interfere with the station's power systems. They'd approached it, gotten close enough for whatever process was happening to reach some kind of threshold. And then, "Approaching," Carter whispered. Morrison looked at him sharply. "What?" "That's what I was warning about, not warning Houston, warning you. Whatever was out there, I could sense it somehow. And I knew it was approaching, or we were approaching it. The message wasn't for ground control. It was for us." The implications of that statement hung heavy in the air. If Carter was right, if he'd somehow detected the presence of the external source before any instruments had registered it clearly, then what did that suggest? Some form of direct communication? A signal that could interface with human consciousness? Aaron broke the silence. "We need to include all of this in the report, everything. The EM signature, the blackout, Neil's episode, the tones in the recording, all of it." Morrison nodded slowly. "Agreed. But we need to be careful about how we frame this. We stick to observable facts, measurable data. We don't speculate about external intelligences or consciousness-altering signals or any of the things we're all thinking but can't prove. What if Houston asks us to speculate? Carter asked. Then we speculate off the record, in private conversations with the flight surgeon and the science team. But in the official report, we stick to what we can document. She was right, of course. Space agencies lived and died by data, by evidence that could be quantified and analyzed. Subjective experiences, feelings of compulsion, mysterious absences of memory. These were not the language of official reports. They were the territory of psychology, of phenomena that couldn't be easily explained or defended. But Carter knew what he'd experienced. And looking at Morrison and Aaron, seeing the unease in their eyes, he knew they believed it too, even if they couldn't say it out loud. Something had been out there. Something that could broadcast on frequencies their instruments barely detected, that could reach into the station and influence events, perhaps even influence minds. And it had approached them, or they had approached it, close enough to trigger the blackout, close enough to leave its mark in the form of electromagnetic signatures and mysterious recordings. The question now was whether it would return, and if it did, what would it want? At approximately 0642 GMT, Electrical Systems Specialist Aaron Vogel detected anomalous electromagnetic readings from solar panel 3B. Initial analysis showed regular voltage fluctuations at 1.7 Hz frequency, inconsistent with normal operational parameters. Over the following 5 minutes, the EM signature increased in amplitude by approximately 60%. During this period, the station experienced intermittent power fluctuations affecting lighting and communication systems. At 0647 GMT, all station systems failed simultaneously, resulting in complete power loss for duration of 4 minutes 37 seconds. Systems restored automatically without crew intervention. No injuries sustained, no permanent equipment damage detected. External camera footage from pre-blackout period shows visual distortion near solar panel 3B, consistent with localized field effect of unknown origin. Audio recordings from same period contain unidentified tonal signatures not attributable to known sources. Trajectory analysis suggests possible external EM source positioned ahead of station along orbital path. Source ceased transmission at moment of blackout and has not resumed. Recommend detailed analysis of all telemetry and recording data. Request consultation with astrophysics and electromagnetic phenomena specialists regarding potential natural or artificial origins of observed effects. All crew members remain fit for duty. Station systems nominal. Continuing normal operations pending further guidance. Morrison hit send, and the report began its journey to Houston, where it would be reviewed, analyzed, and ultimately filed in the vast database of anomalous events that the space program had been quietly accumulating for decades. Within hours, the responses began to arrive. Technical questions from the engineering team, medical inquiries from the flight surgeons, and eventually, a private communication from the flight director requesting a confidential voice conversation with Morrison alone. Carter watched as the commander took the call in the private communication booth, her expression growing more guarded with each passing minute. When she emerged 30 minutes later, she looked tired, older somehow. "What did they say?" Aaron asked. Morrison glanced around, making sure they were alone in the module. "They're classifying the incident, not publicly but internally. Everything we observed is being moved to a restricted access database. The official explanation for the blackout will be a cascading power management fault caused by solar panel degradation." "That's not what happened," Carter protested. "I know, but that's the story we're going with. The flight director was very clear. We're not to discuss the EM anomaly, the external source, or the tonal signatures outside of classified channels. And..." She hesitated. Neil, they want you to undergo psychiatric evaluation when you return to Earth. The episode where you recorded that message, they're concerned it might indicate stress-related issues. Carter felt anger flare, then forced it down. This was how it always happened. Astronauts who saw things that didn't fit the narrative, who reported phenomena that couldn't be easily explained, they got quietly sidelined. Medical evaluations, reassignments, early retirements. The program protected itself by removing anyone who threatened its carefully maintained image of scientific rationality. "I'm fine," he said evenly. "But I'll cooperate with whatever evaluation they want." Morrison put a hand on his shoulder. "I know you're fine, and for what it's worth, I believe what you experienced was real. But we have to play by their rules if we want to stay in the game." That night, unable to sleep, Carter floated back to the observation window in Module 3. Earth turned beneath him, peaceful and beautiful, continents drifting past in their eternal rotation. Above, the stars burned with cold fire, countless points of light representing countless worlds, countless possibilities. Somewhere out there, something had sent a signal. Something had approached them, or allowed them to approach it. And for 4 minutes and 37 seconds, it had touched the station, touching them, leaving evidence of its presence in electromagnetic signatures and mysterious words. Approaching. Carter wondered if the word had been a warning or a promise. And he wondered if, somewhere in the vast dark, something was still watching them, waiting for the next time their orbits would intersect. This is a personal log, unscheduled, unsanctioned. If Mission Control is monitoring this, which they probably are, then let me be clear. I'm documenting this for the record, for history, for whoever comes after us and needs to know what really happened up here. It's been 13 days since the blackout. 13 days since something out there sent a signal that shut down every system on this station. 13 days since I stood in the command module and spoke a word I don't remember speaking. Houston wants us to believe it was a power fault. A coincidence of failing components and degraded solar panels that somehow caused a cascading failure across multiple redundant systems. They've sent up software patches, new diagnostic protocols, procedures to prevent what they claim was an engineering mishap. But I know what I saw. What we all saw. The shimmer around the solar panels, the organized tones in the recording, the external source that appeared in our orbital path and then vanished the moment we got close enough. That wasn't a power fault. That was contact, brief, limited, perhaps unintentional. But contact nonetheless. The others feel it too. I can see it in their eyes during the daily briefings, in the way we've all started watching the windows more carefully during dark side passes, in how conversations pause when someone mentions the date. March 14th, the day we got close to something we weren't supposed to see. Morrison is holding up well, but the strain is showing. She's received multiple private communications from Houston, conversations she won't discuss even with us. Erin has thrown herself into her work, running diagnostics on every electrical system aboard the station, as if she can somehow find a mundane explanation that will let us all sleep better. And me? I keep coming back to this window, staring out at the void, wondering if it's still out there, watching us. Waiting end log. Carter turned off the recorder and tucked it into his personal storage locker, hidden beneath a layer of spare clothing and technical manuals. The recorder itself was a violation of protocol. Personal electronics were strictly regulated aboard the ISS, but he'd managed to smuggle it up in his personal effects. Some things needed to be documented outside the official channels, away from the sanitizing influence of Mission Control and the Public Affairs Office. A soft knock on the module hatch made him turn. Erin floated there, her expression hesitant. "Got a minute?" "Always. What's up?" She pulled herself inside and closed the hatch, creating the illusion of privacy in an environment where true privacy didn't exist. I've been going through the telemetry data from that day, not the official analysis, the raw data streams, and I found something they left out of the reports. Carter felt his pulse quicken. "Show me." She pulled out her tablet and called up a series of graphs showing electromagnetic readings from the solar arrays. This is the official timeline they sent to us. It shows the EM signature building from 0642 to 0647, then cutting off at the moment of blackout. Clean, linear progression. Easy to explain as equipment degradation. But this is the actual raw data. She swiped to a different graph. The signature didn't cut off at 0647. It continued for another 17 seconds after power restoration, and during those 17 seconds it changed. Carter studied the graph. She was right. The waveform that had been so regular, so mechanical in its 1.7 Hz pulsing, had shifted during those final seconds. The frequency increased. The amplitude modulated in patterns that looked almost like... "It looks like data encoding," he said quietly. "That's what I thought too. So I ran it through a Fourier analysis, looking for any structure that might represent information transfer. And I found this." She brought up another display, this one showing the signal broken down into its component frequencies. "There are discrete packets here, separated by gaps consistent with digital transmission protocols. Whatever was sending that signal, in those final 17 seconds, it transmitted something specific. Can you decode it? I've tried, but without knowing the encoding scheme, the compression algorithm, even the basic syntax, it's like trying to read a book in a language you've never seen. I can tell it's language, but I can't tell what it says." Carter leaned back, his mind racing. "Have you shown this to Morrison?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Because here's the thing, Neil, those 17 seconds. That's roughly how long it would take a radio signal to travel 5,000 kilometers. Which is interesting because the signal propagation speed suggests the source was moving away from us at high velocity." Carter finished. It sent one last transmission as it departed. Aaron nodded. "A message, a data packet. Maybe even instructions or coordinates, something it wanted us to have before it left. Or something it wanted to leave behind." They floated in silence, contemplating the implications. If Aaron was right, if the external source had deliberately transmitted data to the station during those final moments, then the encounter wasn't random. It was purposeful. The blackout might not have been a malfunction or an accidental side effect. It might have been necessary. A way to ensure the transmission was received without interference from the station's normal electromagnetic environment. "We need to tell Morrison," Carter said finally. "And we need to keep copies of this data somewhere Houston can't erase it." "Already done. I've got 3 encrypted backups stored in different locations aboard the station. But Neil, if we go public with this, if we push too hard, you know what happens. We've both seen it. Astronauts who ask too many questions, who report things that don't fit the narrative. They get sidelined. I know. Is it worth it? Risking everything we've worked for on the chance that someone, someday, might take this seriously?" Carter thought about the question. Really thought about it. His career meant everything to him. The years of training, the missions, the privilege of floating 400 kilometers above Earth and seeing things no poet or painter could fully capture. Throwing that away would hurt. It would hurt terribly. But some truths were bigger than careers. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's worth it." Commander Morrison took the news better than Carter expected. She listened to Aaron's analysis, studied the graphs and waveforms, and asked pointed technical questions that demonstrated she understood exactly what they were showing her. When Aaron finished, Morrison was quiet for a long moment, floating in the command module with her eyes closed. "How many people know about this?" she finally asked. "Just the three of us," Carter replied. "We wanted to brief you before taking it further." "Good. Keep it that way for now." She opened her eyes and looked at them both. "I'm going to tell you something that stays between us, something that came up in one of my private conversations with Houston. There have been other incidents. Not many, not frequently, but over the decades since we've had a permanent presence in low Earth orbit, there have been encounters. Unexplained phenomena, objects that shouldn't exist, signals from unknown sources. Each time, the official response has been to classify the information and move on." "Why?" Aaron asked. "Because the alternative is chaos. Think about what it would mean to publicly acknowledge that there's something out there. Something intelligent. Something so far beyond our technology that we can't even understand its basic communication protocols. The political implications alone would be staggering. Every spacefaring nation would want answers we don't have. The military would demand defensive capabilities we can't develop. And the public would be terrified. Or inspired," Carter countered. "We could be the generation that makes first contact, that proves we're not alone. That's worth some disruption." Morrison's expression softened. "I admire your optimism, Neil, I really do. But I've been doing this longer than you, and I've seen what happens when inconvenient truths collide with institutional inertia. The truth doesn't always win. Sometimes it just gets buried deeper." "So, what do you suggest we do?" Aaron asked. "We document everything. Every piece of data, every analysis, every observation. We keep it secure, encrypted, backed up in multiple locations. And when we return to Earth, when we're out from under Mission Control's direct oversight, we find someone we can trust. Someone with the credibility and the platform to make this public in a way that can't be easily dismissed." "That's months away," Carter protested. "Our rotation doesn't end until September. Then we wait. We do our jobs. We smile for the cameras. We give Houston nothing to use against us. And in September, when we're safely on the ground, we tell the truth. Not through official channels, because those are compromised. But through the media, through academic journals, through every avenue that can amplify this story before they have a chance to suppress it." It was a plan. Not a perfect one, but better than anything Carter had been able to come up with. They would wait, document, preserve, and when the time was right, they would speak. But waiting, as it turned out, was harder than any of them anticipated. The incident repeated on April 3rd. Carter was conducting a routine spectrometry experiment in the laboratory module when the first signs appeared. A flicker in the overhead lighting, so brief he almost missed it. Then another, longer this time, accompanied by that familiar sensation of pressure change that defied all physical measurement. He keyed his comm immediately. "Commander, we're experiencing power fluctuations in the lab. Recommend we check the solar array telemetry." Aaron's voice came back, tight with tension. "Already on it. Panel 3B is showing the same EM signature as before. Frequency 1.7 Hz, amplitude climbing." Carter felt his heart rate spike. It was happening again. Whatever had approached them 3 weeks ago, it was back. Morrison's voice cut through the comm chatter. "All crew, this is Commander Morrison. Secure all experiments and return to the command module, now." Carter moved quickly, shutting down the spectrometer and stowing his samples in the secure locker. As he pulled himself through the connecting passage, he could see the lights throughout the station beginning to flicker in unison, that same synchronized pulse that presaged the blackout. The command module was crowded when he arrived, all 4 crew members floating in the small space, their eyes fixed on the main display showing the external camera feed. The shimmer was back, that heat distortion effect surrounding panel 3B, pulsing with mechanical regularity. Distance? Morrison asked. Same as before, Aaron replied. Approximately 300 meters, positioned ahead of us in our orbital path. We're closing at 7.966 kilometers per second. Time to intercept? 39 seconds. Carter watched the display, his hands gripping the handholds so tightly his knuckles went white. On the screen, the shimmer was growing, expanding outward from the solar panel like ripples on water. And in the background, just barely audible through the station's hull, he could hear those tones again. That strange harmonic music that seemed to vibrate through metal and bone alike. Houston, ISS, Morrison transmitted. We are experiencing another EM anomaly event identical to March 14th incident. All systems nominal at present, but anticipating possible power disruption, will maintain contact as long as possible. The response came back distorted by static. Copy, ISS, standing by. 20 seconds. The lights were strobing now, the entire station pulsing with that 1.7 Hz rhythm. Carter felt the pressure sensation growing stronger, as if the air itself was becoming thicker, more resistant. Beside him, Yuki grabbed a handhold for support, her face pale. 10 seconds. The tones were louder now, clearer, and with sudden clarity Carter understood what they were. Not just random harmonics, but a pattern. A sequence. Like someone counting down or calling out, or announcing their arrival. 5 seconds. Morrison's hands flew over the keyboard, entering commands to save all telemetry data to the secure backups. Aaron was doing the same at the power management console. They'd learned from the first encounter. This time, they would capture everything. 0. The shimmer enveloped the entire solar array, and for a moment Carter saw something within it. A shape, vast and geometric, angular edges that didn't quite resolve into anything his mind could process. It was there and not there. Visible and invisible, present in a way that defied standard perception. Then the blackout hit. But this time, Carter stayed conscious. Or perhaps conscious wasn't the right word. He was aware, but not of the station, not of his body floating weightless in the dark. He was aware of something else. A presence vast and ancient, observing him with attention that felt almost tactile. And in that moment of contact, he understood. They weren't sending messages, they weren't trying to communicate in any conventional sense. They were conducting a survey, taking measurements, documenting. The ISS, the crew, humanity's fragile presence in orbit, all of it was being recorded, cataloged, studied by intelligences that had been doing this long before humans climbed down from the trees. The blackout ended. Carter gasped, his lungs heaving as if he'd been holding his breath. The emergency lights flickered on, the systems booted up, and gradually the station returned to normal operational status. But nothing felt normal. Nothing would ever feel normal again. "Report," Morrison said, her voice shaky. "Is everyone okay?" Confirmations came back from around the module. They were all present, all functional, all trying to process what had just happened. The blackout had lasted 6 minutes this time, nearly a minute and a half longer than before. Aaron checked the spectrum analyzer. The signature is gone, no trace of the external source. "Did anyone else?" Yuki started, then stopped, clearly struggling to find words for what she'd experienced. "Feel something?" Carter finished. "Yes, we all did." They looked at each other, 4 people who'd just shared an experience that had no name, no category, no place in the careful taxonomy of spaceflight hazards. They'd touched something beyond human understanding, or it had touched them, and the boundary between observer and observed had dissolved for 6 minutes of stolen time. Morrison made a decision. "We're reporting this. All of it. The full details, no sanitization, no careful editing. If Houston wants to classify it, bury it, pretend it never happened, fine, but we're going on record with the truth. She began typing the incident report, her fingers moving with deliberate precision. Carter watched over her shoulder, seeing the words appear on the screen. During second EM anomaly event, all crew members reported subjective experience of external presence. Sensation described as observation or examination by unknown consciousness. Duration correlated with system's blackout period. Crew remains fit for duty, but requests consultation with relevant specialists regarding interpretation of psychological phenomena associated with EM events. It was careful language, professional language, but it said what needed to be said. They'd experienced contact with something, and they were documenting it for the record. The response from Houston came back within an hour. It was not what they expected. ISS Houston. Your report has been received and reviewed by flight director and medical team. Effective immediately. Expedition 19 is being cut short. Soyuz undocking is scheduled for April 20th, 2 weeks from today. Replacement crew will arrive on April 25th to assume station operations. Recommend you begin preparations for return immediately. They were being pulled. Not reassigned, not rotated on schedule, but recalled. Brought home early because they'd seen too much, reported too much, asked too many questions. Carter felt a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at the transparent attempt to silence them. Relief that he'd soon be away from this place where reality bent in ways it wasn't supposed to. But more than anything, he felt sadness. Because they'd been so close to understanding something profound, something that could change humanity's place in the cosmos. And now they'd never know what that something was. This will be my last log entry from the ISS. Tomorrow morning, we undock and begin our journey home. The station will be temporarily uncrewed for 5 days, the first time it's been empty since continuous habitation began in 2000. I wonder if that's why they're pulling us now. Not because of what we reported, but because they want the station empty when it happens again. When whatever is out there makes its next pass through our orbital space. Without crew aboard, without witnesses, they can control the narrative completely. Dr. Carter asks me if I regret filing those reports, pushing back against Houston's explanations. I tell him no, and it's the truth. We saw what we saw. We experienced what we experienced. And whether the world ever learns about it or not, whether history remembers us as reliable professionals or delusional dreamers, we know. That has to be enough. The data is secured. Multiple encrypted copies stored in locations Houston doesn't know about. When we reach Earth, when we're free from Mission Control's oversight, we'll find a way to share it. Not for fame or recognition, but because humanity deserves to know we're not alone. That in the silence of orbit, in the dark between stars, something watches. Something waits. Something approaches. This is Commander Sandra Morrison, signing off from the International Space Station. End log. The Soyuz capsule separated from the ISS at dawn, GMT time, though dawn was a relative concept in orbit. They'd said their goodbyes to the station, the place that had been home for 6 months. Scene of wonders and terrors in equal measure. As the capsule drifted away, slowly increasing the distance through careful thruster burns, Carter looked back at the station one last time. It looked small against the curve of Earth, fragile and impermanent, a tiny outpost of human ambition in an environment that didn't care whether humanity survived or not. But it was beautiful, too, in its own way. A testament to what people could achieve when they worked together, when they dared to leave the cradle and venture into the unknown. The solar panels gleamed in the sunlight, panel 3B among them, showing no sign of the events that had unfolded there. Whatever had visited, whatever had reached out and touched them, it had left no permanent mark on the metal and silicon. The mark it left was elsewhere in memory and data, and for people who would never see the night sky quite the same way again. The re-entry was routine, the parachute deployment textbook perfect. They landed in Kazakhstan under clear skies, and within minutes they were surrounded by the recovery team, helping them out of the capsule and onto solid ground for the first time in 6 months. Carter's legs shook under Earth's gravity. Muscles that had forgotten what weight meant struggling to remember. But he stood, supported by the technicians, and looked up at the sky. Somewhere up there, 400 kilometers above his head, the station continued its endless orbit. And somewhere beyond that, in the vast dark, something else continued its own trajectory, its own mission, its own incomprehensible journey through the cosmos. Would it return? Would another crew experience what they'd experienced, feel what they'd felt? Carter didn't know how, but he knew the data was safe, the truth preserved. And someday, when the time was right, when humanity was ready, that truth would emerge. Until then, they would wait. Document, remember, and keep watching the skies. Welcome back to the quiet dark between Earth and stars. Tonight we return to low Earth orbit, that narrow band of space where humanity maintains its fragile presence among the satellites and debris. It's a crowded neighborhood, tracked by radar, monitored by ground stations, mapped down to the smallest fragment of discarded metal. Everything up there has a catalog number, a trajectory, a known origin. Everything except what pilot Rafael Ortega saw on June 12, 2012. This is the story of test mission LEO 22A, a routine orbital verification flight that became anything but routine when something appeared 14 kilometers below the International Space Station. Something that matched their velocity perfectly. Something that shouldn't have been there. Something that, according to every radar system watching the sky that day, didn't exist at all. As you drift toward sleep, ask yourself, what moves through space without leaving a trace? What watches from the shadows between orbits? And why would NASA be so quick to call it debris? The Earth turned beneath them in silence, a sphere of blue and white suspended in the velvet black. Rafael Ortega floated in the commander's seat of the test vehicle, a modified crew capsule designed to evaluate new orbital maneuvering systems. Beside him, Dana Brooks monitored the navigation displays, her eyes tracking the constantly updating numbers that defined their position in three-dimensional space. This was their third day in orbit, the final phase of a week-long mission to test autonomous rendezvous protocols. They'd spent the previous 48 hours executing a series of precise burns and trajectory adjustments, demonstrating the capsule's ability to approach and maintain station-keeping with theoretical targets. Tomorrow, they would perform the actual rendezvous with the ISS, docking briefly before beginning their descent back to Earth. Everything had gone perfectly. The systems performed within expected parameters, the fuel consumption matched projections, and the crew had encountered none of the minor glitches that usually plagued test missions. It was almost boring, which in spaceflight was exactly what you wanted. Boring meant predictable. Predictable meant safe. Coming up on mark for burn sequence 7, Dana announced, her fingers dancing across the touchscreen interface, initiating pre-burn checklist. Rafael acknowledged with a nod, his attention focused on the attitude indicators. The burn would be small, just enough to adjust their orbital inclination by 0.3 degrees, bringing them into the ideal approach vector for tomorrow's ISS rendezvous. Nothing dramatic, nothing risky, just another item on the mission timeline. Houston, LEO 22A, he transmitted. We are go for burn sequence 7 at mark plus 30 seconds. The response came back after the standard 3-second delay, the speed of light lag that reminded you how far you were from home. Copy that, 22A. We show you go from our end. Weather is perfect for your landing window tomorrow. Looks like you picked a good week to be up there. Raphael smiled. The Capcom on duty was Jennifer Hastings, a veteran astronaut who'd flown 4 shuttle missions before moving to ground control. She had a talent for keeping the mood light during long missions, a skill that was worth its weight in gold when you were cooped up in a capsule the size of a minivan for a week. All the credit goes to our scheduling team, he replied. We specifically requested the no disasters option when we filed our flight plan. Smart thinking, mark in 10 seconds. Dana counted down the final seconds, her voice steady and professional. When she reached 0, Raphael felt the gentle push of the thrusters firing, a subtle acceleration that would have been imperceptible on Earth but registered clearly in the microgravity environment. The burn lasted exactly 4.7 seconds, then cut off automatically, leaving them in silence again. Burn complete, Dana reported. Delta V achieved is 1.2 meters per second, right on the money. Houston copies. Looking good from here, 22A. Your track is nominal. Raphael was about to acknowledge when something caught his eye through the forward viewport. A glint of light, brief but distinct, reflecting off something below them. He leaned forward, pressing his face closer to the reinforced glass, trying to spot it again. You see that? He asked. Dana looked up from her displays. See what? Flash of light, maybe 10 o'clock low, looked like sunlight reflecting off metal. She unstrapped and floated over to the window, positioning herself beside him. They were currently passing over the Pacific Ocean, the vast blue expanse broken only by scattered clouds. The sunlight at this altitude was harsh and unfiltered, capable of creating brilliant reflections off any surface it touched. Could be debris, Dana suggested. There's plenty of it up here. Old satellite components, rocket stages, paint flecks. Yeah, probably. But something about the reflection bothered him. It had been too steady, too sustained to be a tumbling piece of debris. Most orbital junk rotated chaotically, creating flash patterns as different surfaces caught the sun. This had been different. Constant, as if whatever produced it was maintaining a stable attitude. He was about to dismiss it when he saw it again. Not a flash this time, but a persistent gleam, like light reflecting off a curved surface, and it was below them, tracking parallel to their orbit. There, he said, pointing. You see it now? Dana followed his gesture, squinting against the glare. I see something. Looks bright, whatever it is. Could be one of the ISS solar panels catching the sun at just the right angle. Raphael pulled up the orbital tracking display on his console. The ISS was currently 14 kilometers above them, almost exactly overhead in orbital terms. But this object was below them, not above. And according to the tracking data, there should be nothing in their immediate vicinity. The nearest catalogued debris was more than 50 kilometers away. Houston 22A, he transmitted, keeping his voice casual. We're observing what appears to be a reflective object in our vicinity. Can you confirm any traffic in our orbital neighborhood? A longer pause this time, more than just transmission lag. When Jennifer's voice returned, there was a subtle shift in tone, the easy banter replaced by professional focus. 22A, Houston, stand by while we check the catalog. Raphael and Dana waited, watching the glint of light below them. It was holding position relative to their capsule, maintaining what appeared to be a constant separation distance. As they watched, the object caught the sun at a different angle, and for just a moment they could see its shape more clearly. It was spherical, or nearly so, smooth and metallic with a surface that seemed to shimmer like liquid mercury. No visible antennae, no solar panels, no identifying markings, just a perfect globe of reflective material, perhaps 3 meters in diameter, flying in formation with them at precisely the same velocity. "That's not debris," Dana said quietly. "Debris doesn't maintain station keeping." "No, it doesn't." Houston's response finally came through. 22A. We're showing no cataloged objects within 100 kilometers of your position. Can you provide more detailed description of what you're observing? Raphael reached for the camera controls, activating the external documentation system. The capsule was equipped with high-resolution cameras designed to photograph the vehicle's exterior during flight, capturing imagery for post-mission analysis. He aimed one of the cameras at the object and began recording. "Houston, we have visual on what appears to be a spherical object, approximately 3 meters diameter, metallic surface, highly reflective. It's maintaining position relative to our vehicle at what we estimate to be 14 kilometers distance, bearing 195 degrees relative to our current attitude. Object appears stable, no tumbling or rotation evident." Another pause. Raphael could imagine the sudden activity in mission control, controllers conferring with flight dynamics specialists, pulling up tracking data, trying to explain how an object that size could be in their vicinity without showing up on radar. "Copy your description, 22A. We're not showing anything on our tracking systems. Can you estimate its velocity relative to your position?" Dana had already pulled up the navigation computer, using the optical tracking system to measure the object's apparent motion against the background stars. "Houston, 22A. Object appears to be matching our orbital velocity within measurement error. Relative motion is essentially 0. This time, the pause stretched even longer. Raphael could hear muted voices in the background of the comm channel, people talking urgently but too far from the microphone to make out words. When Jennifer came back, her tone was carefully neutral. "Roger, 22A. Continue your observations and documentation. We're going to bring some additional eyes into the loop here. Stand by." Raphael glanced at Dana. In 6 years of flying together, first in the shuttle program and now on test missions, they'd developed the kind of unspoken communication that came from shared experience and mutual trust. One look was enough to confirm they were thinking the same thing. This was not normal. This was not any kind of normal at all. "Capcom 22A, Raphael said. "Request clarification on engagement protocols. Do you want us to attempt approach or maintain current separation? Negative on approach 22A. Maintain your current trajectory and continue observations from your present position. Do not, repeat, do not alter your flight plan to investigate." The emphasis on those last words was unusual. Not quite in order, but close enough. Houston wanted them to stay away from whatever that thing was, and they wanted it very clearly on the record that they'd given that instruction. "Copy, Houston. Maintaining current trajectory." Raphael continued filming, while Dana documented everything in the mission log, time-stamping each observation and noting the object's apparent characteristics. The sphere continued to pace them, seemingly content to maintain its position below and slightly behind their capsule. Every few minutes, its surface would catch the sunlight at a new angle, creating brilliant flares of reflected light that made it impossible to look at directly. "It's beautiful," Dana murmured. "Whatever it is, it's beautiful." She was right. There was something hypnotic about the object's smooth perfection, the way it moved through space with seeming effortlessness. No visible propulsion, no exhaust plumes, no reaction control jets. Just silent, steady flight at 27,000 kilometers per hour, maintaining perfect formation with their capsule as if connected by invisible threads. 22A, Houston. A new voice on the comm now, deeper and more authoritative. Raphael recognized it as belonging to Frank Martinez, the flight director. "This is Flight. We've reviewed your telemetry and imagery. We're seeing what you're seeing, and we're working to identify the object. In the meantime, I want you to continue normal operations. Do not deviate from your mission timeline. Is that understood? Copy flight. Continue normal operations, no deviation from timeline. Good. Now, I need you to switch to secure channel for a moment. Stand by for frequency. Raphael and Dana exchanged another glance. Secure channels were reserved for discussions that couldn't be conducted over open airways, either for reasons of national security or to avoid public panic. The fact that they were being asked to switch suggested Houston was taking this very seriously indeed. The frequency information came through, and Raphael adjusted the communications panel to the encrypted channel. Houston, 22A on secure. Go ahead. 22A, this is flight. I'm going to be direct with you. We have no idea what you're looking at. It's not one of ours, it's not Russian, it's not Chinese. It's not showing up on any radar system, military or civilian. As far as our ground-based tracking is concerned, that object doesn't exist. Raphael felt a chill run down his spine, despite the comfortable temperature in the capsule. But we can see it, flight. It's definitely there. I know. And we can see it on your camera feed. But here's the thing. Something that size, at that altitude, should be lit up on radar like a Christmas tree. The fact that it's not suggests either our tracking systems have a massive blind spot we didn't know about, or that object is made of something that doesn't reflect radar waves. Stealth technology? Dana suggested. Possibly, but that would imply someone has orbital stealth capabilities we're not aware of, which opens up a whole other set of problems. Look, here's what we need from you. Continue documenting everything you can about this object. Photograph it from as many angles as possible. Note any changes in its behavior, any variations in position or attitude, but do not, under any circumstances, try to make direct contact. Understood? Understood, flight. Good. We're going to keep this on secure channel for now. Minimize the number of people who know about this. When you get back tomorrow, there's going to be a detailed debriefing. In the meantime, just fly your mission like nothing unusual is happening. The channel closed, leaving Raphael and Dana floating in the capsule with only the quiet hum of the life support systems for company. Through the viewport, the mysterious sphere continued its patient escort, a silent companion in the void. "What do you think it is?" Dana asked after a long moment. Raphael considered the question. His training as a test pilot had taught him to deal with facts, with measurable data and verifiable phenomena, but what he was looking at defied easy categorization. It wasn't behaving like any satellite he'd ever seen. It wasn't moving like debris, and the fact that radar couldn't detect it suggested technology beyond anything he knew the United States possessed. "I think," he said slowly, "it's something we weren't supposed to find, or maybe something that found us." Over the next hour, they documented the object from every possible angle, using both the external cameras and their own handheld photography equipment. The sphere remained constant in its position, never wavering, never approaching closer, but never falling behind. It was as if it had locked onto their trajectory and intended to follow them for as long as they remained in orbit. At one point, Dana attempted to measure the object's distance more precisely using the laser rangefinder built into their navigation system. The laser was designed to bounce off solid surfaces and measure the time it took for the light to return, allowing precise calculation of range. But when she aimed it at the sphere, nothing happened. The laser simply vanished into that reflective surface without producing any return signal. "That's impossible," she muttered, checking the instrument. "The rangefinder is working fine, but it's like the object is absorbing the laser instead of reflecting it." "Add it to the list of impossible things we've seen today," Raphael said. They were approaching the terminator line now, the boundary between day and night that swept across Earth's surface every 90 minutes. As they slipped into the planet's shadow, Raphael wondered if the object would remain visible without direct sunlight to illuminate it. The answer came quickly. Yes, it would. Instead of fading into darkness, the sphere began to emit its own faint glow, a soft luminescence that had nothing to do with reflected light. It's self-illuminated, Dana breathed. Houston, are you seeing this? We see it, 22A. Frank Martinez's voice was tight with tension. Continue observations. The glow wasn't bright, just enough to make the sphere visible against the black of space. It pulsed gently, a slow rhythm that reminded Raphael of breathing, or a heartbeat. And as he watched, he realized the pulsing was regular, precisely timed. Approximately 1.2 seconds between each pulse. A signal, a beacon, or just the operational characteristic of whatever power source kept the sphere in flight. They passed through the 45-minute night, their capsule illuminated only by the instrument panels and the ghostly glow of the sphere below them. When they emerged back into sunlight on the far side of Earth, the object's luminescence faded, replaced once again by reflected brilliance off its metallic surface. 22A, Houston. A new voice this time, female but unfamiliar. This is ISS Capcom. Be advised the station crew has visual on your companion. They confirm your observations and are conducting their own documentation from their vantage point. Raphael looked up, though from his current position he couldn't see the ISS. But he knew they were up there, 14 kilometers above, watching the same phenomenon from a different angle. At least that meant they weren't hallucinating. Whatever this was, it was real enough for multiple observers to see it independently. Copy, ISS Capcom. Good to know we're not crazy. Nobody's saying you're crazy, 22A, just puzzled. We're all very puzzled. The mission timeline called for them to execute another small burn in 30 minutes, adjusting their trajectory in preparation for tomorrow's rendezvous. Raphael wondered how the sphere would respond. Would it match their maneuver, adjusting its own orbit to maintain formation? Or would the burn break whatever connection existed between them, sending the object drifting off on its original trajectory? What do you think happens when we fire the engines? Dana asked, echoing his thoughts. I guess we're about to find out. The 30 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Raphael and Dana continued their documentation, photographing the sphere from every angle their cameras could reach, noting subtle variations in its reflective properties as the angle of sunlight changed. The object remained perfectly steady, its position relative to their capsule unchanged despite the constant orbital motion that carried them both around the planet at nearly 8 kilometers per second. Houston had gone quiet on the secure channel, only occasional status checks breaking the silence. Raphael imagined the scene in mission control, flight directors conferring with military liaisons, engineers pulling up tracking data, security officers making urgent phone calls to whatever agencies handled situations like this. Because there had to be procedures, protocols for unidentified objects in orbit. The military tracked everything, cataloged every piece of space junk larger than a softball. The fact that this 3-meter sphere had appeared without warning suggested either a catastrophic failure in America's space surveillance network or something far more troubling. Coming up on mark for burn sequence 8, Dana announced, breaking Raphael's thoughts. 5 minutes. Copy. He keyed the comm. Houston, 22A. Pre-burn checklist complete. Request go for sequence 8. Frank Martinez's voice came back immediately. 22A, you are go for burn 8. And Raphael, we'll be watching very carefully to see what your friend does. Roger that, flight. We're curious ourselves. The burn would be larger than the previous one, a 12-second firing that would circularize their orbit and set up the final approach geometry for tomorrow's ISS rendezvous. It would change their velocity by nearly 4 meters per second, enough to create visible separation from any object that didn't actively match the maneuver. Dana counted down the final minute while Raphael monitored the attitude indicators, ensuring the capsule was precisely oriented for the burn. At 15 seconds, the computers took over, running through automated pre-ignition sequences that happened too fast for human oversight. "Mark!" Dana called. The thrusters fired, pressing Raphael gently into his seat with the unfamiliar sensation of weight. 12 seconds of steady acceleration, burning hypergolic propellants that had been stored in the capsule's tanks since launch. The numbers on the velocity display climbed steadily, the delta V accumulating exactly as programmed. Then the burn ended, and they were weightless again, silence returning to the capsule. "Burn complete," Dana reported. "Delta V achieved is 4.1 meters per second, right on nominal." Houston copies. Raphael immediately turned to the viewport, searching for the sphere. For a moment, he couldn't find it, and his heart rate spiked with the thought that the object had departed, unable or unwilling to match their maneuver. But then he spotted it, still there, still maintaining its position 14 kilometers below them. "It matched us," Dana said, her voice filled with wonder. "It accelerated with us. No visible thrust, no exhaust plume, but it matched our burn perfectly." 22A, Houston confirms. "We're seeing it on your camera feed. The object maintained formation throughout your maneuver." Raphael heard the tension in Frank Martinez's voice, the carefully controlled tone of someone trying not to sound alarmed. Because this changed things. Debris didn't adjust its trajectory. Satellites followed predictable orbits determined by their initial velocity and the pull of Earth's gravity. But this sphere, this object that shouldn't exist according to radar, had just demonstrated powered flight, the ability to sense or predict their maneuver and adjust accordingly. That implied guidance systems, propulsion, intelligence either artificial or organic. "Flight 22A, Raphael said carefully. "Recommend we maintain heightened observation protocols. Whatever this is, it's clearly capable of autonomous maneuvering." "Agreed, 22A. Continue documentation. We're working on next steps here." The comm went silent again, leaving Raphael and Dana alone with their mysterious companion. The sphere had resumed its gentle pulsing now that they were back in Earth's shadow. That slow, steady rhythm that seemed almost like breathing. Raphael found himself timing his own breaths to match it, then consciously stopping when he realized what he was doing. "What do you think it wants?" Dana asked quietly. "Assuming it wants anything. Could be automated, following programmed instructions. Could be remote piloted from somewhere. Could be, but it feels like more than that. The way it moves, the way it maintains position, it feels purposeful, like it's watching us." Raphael couldn't argue with that assessment. He felt it too, that sense of being observed, studied. The sphere's position wasn't random. It had chosen to stay below them, where it would be visible through their forward viewport. If it had wanted to avoid detection, it could have positioned itself above them, or behind, or anywhere else in the vast three-dimensional space around their orbital track. But it was here, where they could see it, where its presence would be undeniable. "Maybe that's the point," he said. "Maybe it wants us to see it." The hours passed in a strange routine. They continued their scheduled mission activities, eating prepackaged meals, performing system checks, communicating with Houston on routine matters. But every few minutes, one of them would drift to the viewport to check on their companion, confirming it was still there, still maintaining its patient vigil. The sphere never wavered. Through 3 more orbital passes, through the cycling rhythm of day and night, it stayed with them like a shadow, matching their every move with precision that seemed to defy physics. No thrust visible, no reaction mass expelled, yet somehow maintaining perfect formation with the spacecraft traveling at 27,000 kilometers per hour. As they passed over North America during their 7th orbit since the sphere's appearance, Houston updated them with new information. Or rather, with a lack of information that was somehow more disturbing than any explanation would have been. 22A, this is flight. We've completed our analysis of all available tracking data, reviewed satellite imagery, ground-based radar, even some assets we don't usually acknowledge exist. The conclusion is unanimous. As far as our sensors are concerned, that object is not there. It's optically visible to you and the ISS crew. It's showing up on your cameras, but it's completely transparent to electromagnetic detection. How is that possible? Dana asked. We don't know. Best guess from our engineers is some kind of active radar absorption system, something that perfectly cancels reflected signals. But that's theoretical, and even the theory has problems. An object would need to know it was being illuminated by radar and actively generate a canceling wave pattern. The computing power and sensor fusion required would be extraordinary. So we're looking at very advanced technology, Raphael said. A pause. That's one interpretation, yes. The way Frank said it made Raphael's skin prickle. There was something being left unsaid, some conclusion the flight director had reached, but didn't want to voice over an open channel, even a secure one. Flight 22A. Request clarification. What's the other interpretation? Another long pause, filled with the soft crackle of the comm channel. When Frank spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. The other interpretation is that we're not dealing with technology at all. At least, not technology as we understand it. That perhaps radar doesn't detect the object not because it's being absorbed, but because the object exists in some state where electromagnetic radiation simply doesn't interact with it normally. Dana's eyes widened. You're talking about something outside conventional physics. I'm saying we've exhausted conventional explanations, and we need to consider unconventional ones. Look, this conversation is above both our pay grades and probably classified 6 ways from Sunday. But you two are the ones up there with eyes on this thing, and you deserve to know that we're not ruling anything out, anything. The implications of that statement settled over the capsule like a weight. Houston, the organization that represented America's finest scientific and engineering minds, was admitting they had no explanation for what Raphael and Dana were observing. They were entertaining possibilities that ventured into territory usually reserved for science fiction and fringe theory. Understood, flight, Raphael said. We'll continue observations and documentation. That's all we can ask. And 22A, when you get back, there are going to be some people who want to talk to you. People from agencies that don't usually involve themselves in civilian spaceflight. I'm telling you this now so it doesn't come as a surprise. Copy that. The channel closed, and Raphael turned to find Dana staring at him with an expression mixing excitement and apprehension. He's talking about military intelligence, probably aerospace defense, maybe others. I know. Raphael, what if this is first contact? What if we're witnessing? Don't. He held up a hand. Don't finish that sentence. We don't know what this is, and speculation won't help. We document, we observe, we follow procedures. Let the people with more information than us figure out what it means. But even as he said it, he couldn't deny the thought that had been growing in his mind for the past several hours. The sphere's behavior, its capabilities, the way it had appeared without warning and maintained formation with seemingly impossible technology, it all pointed to an origin that wasn't terrestrial. And if that was true, if what they were seeing was indeed something from beyond Earth, then this moment would be remembered forever. The day humanity stopped being alone in the universe. Night fell again as they passed into Earth's shadow, and the sphere resumed its gentle luminescence. Raphael had set up a camera on continuous recording, capturing the object's pulsing glow in time-lapse. The rhythm never varied, 1.2 seconds between pulses, precise as an atomic clock. He found himself wondering if it was a countdown, or a heartbeat, or simply the operational frequency of whatever power source kept the sphere aloft. "Raphael, look at this." Dana had pulled up the spectral analysis software, feeding it data from the camera. "I ran the sphere's glow through a spectrograph. The light it's emitting. It's not following a black-body curve. It's discrete wavelengths, very specific frequencies." She brought up the graph on the main display. Instead of the smooth, continuous spectrum that characterized thermal radiation, the sphere's light showed sharp peaks at specific wavelengths. Blue-green at 495 nanometers, deep blue at 450, and a spike in the near ultraviolet at 380 nanometers. "Those are the colors of Earth from space," Raphael said slowly. "The blue of water, the green of chlorophyll, the UV signature of ozone." "Exactly. It's like the sphere's displaying Earth's characteristic signature. Or maybe reflecting it back at us? A mirror?" "Of sorts, but selective, choosing specific wavelengths that represent our planet. Why would it do that?" Raphael had no answer. Was it communication? An attempt to signal that the sphere recognized Earth as their home, understood where they came from? Or was it something simpler, a passive response to the environment, the object adapting its appearance to match the colors it detected around it? "Add it to the report," he said, finally. "Everything is data, even the things we can't explain." They emerged back into sunlight over the Pacific, and the sphere's glow faded once more as reflected brilliance took over. Raphael checked the mission timeline. 8 hours until their scheduled sleep period, then 6 more hours before the final approach to ISS and the beginning of their return to Earth. Less than a day left in orbit, and the sphere showed no signs of departing. 22A, Houston. A woman's voice this time, introducing herself as Dr. Sarah Kim from NASA's Office of Planetary Defense. Raphael hadn't known there was such an office, but the title made a certain kind of sense. If something unexpected appeared in Earth's orbital space, someone had to be responsible for evaluating the threat. "Dr. Kim, 22A, go ahead. I've been reviewing your documentation of the object. Excellent work, by the way. I wanted to ask, have you observed any variation in the object's position relative to your vehicle? Any drift, any momentary changes in distance or bearing?" Dana consulted her navigation logs. "Negative. The object has maintained constant relative position since first observation. Distance 14.2 kilometers, bearing 195 degrees relative to our attitude. No measurable deviation. And when you performed your orbital maneuvers, you reported the object matched your velocity changes perfectly?" "That's correct. Both burn sequences were matched without visible delay or overshoot." "Interesting." Dr. Kim's voice carried a note of fascination that transcended the clinical tone of a professional briefing. "That suggests either incredible sensor capability or predictive modeling. The object would need to detect your engine ignition, calculate your trajectory change, and execute its own maneuver in real time to maintain formation. Or," Raphael said carefully, "it could have access to our flight plan. If it was monitoring our communications with Houston, it would know about the scheduled burns in advance." A pause. "That's a disturbing thought, Commander, but you're right. We can't rule it out. I'm going to recommend we shift to encrypted burst transmissions for the remainder of your mission. Minimize the information available to external monitoring." After Dr. Kim signed off, Raphael and Dana looked at each other in silence. The implication was clear. If the sphere could intercept and decode their communications, it represented technology far beyond current human capabilities. Military communications were already encrypted, protected by algorithms that would take centuries to crack with conventional computing. Something that could break those encryptions in real time was something humanity should be very concerned about. "Suppose it is listening," Dana said quietly. "What do we say to it? What can we say? We don't know if it understands language, if it even perceives sound. All we can do is what we've been doing: document, observe, and wait. Wait for what? For it to make the next move. Because so far it's been doing all the revealing. It showed itself to us, followed us, demonstrated capabilities we can't match. The ball's in its court. If it wants communication, it'll have to make that clear." Dana nodded slowly, but Raphael could see the frustration in her eyes. She was a scientist, trained to ask questions and seek answers. The passive observation role ran counter to her instincts. But what else could they do? They had no way to communicate with the sphere, no common language or protocol. Even basic gestures would be meaningless unless the object had some concept of human behavior. So they waited, and watched, and continued their slow orbit around Earth. 3 humans and 1 mystery, bound together by velocity and curiosity and the vast silence of space. Raphael had barely slept during the scheduled rest period. Every time he closed his eyes, he found himself wondering if the sphere would still be there when he opened them. Dana had fared no better, emerging from her sleep station looking tired and wired, running on caffeine and nervous energy. The object remained, constant as a star, maintaining its position through the long night. They'd photographed it during every orbital pass, documenting it from dozens of angles as Earth rotated beneath them. The evidence was overwhelming now. Hundreds of high-resolution images, spectral analysis data, precise measurements of distance and bearing. Whatever happened after they returned to Earth, no one could claim this was a hallucination or instrument error. 22A, Houston, good morning. Frank Martinez sounded like he'd been up all night, too. "Hope you both got some rest. We're go for ISS approach sequence beginning at 0930. Your companion is still with you, I see. Confirmed flight. No change in object status overnight." "Copy that. We've been in consultation with ISS, and they've requested permission to conduct their own observations during your approach. Commander Volkov is particularly interested in getting close-up imagery from their perspective." "Understood. We have no objection." "Good. Now, before we begin the approach sequence, I need to brief you on the return plan. NASA administration has decided to advance your landing by 6 hours. Instead of deorbiting tomorrow morning, you'll be coming home tonight, with splashdown scheduled for 23:45 GMT. Raphael exchanged a quick glance with Dana. Advancing a landing schedule was unusual, requiring recalculation of orbital mechanics and recovery operations. It suggested someone at a very high level wanted them on the ground sooner rather than later. "Any particular reason for the schedule change, flight?" A pause. "Let's just say there are people eager to debrief you in person. The paperwork is already approved. Your deorbit burn will occur at 22:17 GMT, right after you undock from ISS. We're compressing the station visit to 2 hours maximum." "Copy, flight. We'll be ready." The morning passed in a flurry of activity as they prepared for the ISS rendezvous. Raphael performed the standard pre-approach checks, verifying that all systems were functioning nominally. Dana monitored the navigation computers as they calculated the complex series of burns that would bring them into position beneath the station. Through it all, the sphere watched. It had moved slightly during the night, adjusting its position to account for orbital perturbations, but it maintained its relative bearing with precision that would have impressed any formation flying pilot. Whatever guidance system it used, it was responding to forces Raphael couldn't detect, making constant micro-adjustments to hold station with their capsule. At 0930, Houston gave them the go for final approach. Raphael initiated the first burn, a gentle acceleration that raised their orbit toward the ISS's altitude. The sphere matched them perfectly, maintaining its 14-kilometer separation as both objects climbed toward the station. 200 meters to ISS, Donna called out, reading from the rendezvous radar. Closure rate 2 meters per second, right on profile. Through the overhead window, Raphael could now see the station's distinctive shape, solar panels stretching like wings against the black. 6 crew members were up there watching their approach, and according to Houston, at least 3 of them were at observation windows with cameras trained on the mysterious sphere below. 100 meters, closure rate 1.5. The station grew larger, resolving into individual modules and structural details. Raphael could see figures at the cupola windows, silhouettes against the interior lighting. He wondered what they were thinking, what theories they'd formed about the object that had accompanied their visitors from Earth. 50 meters, closure rate 0.8, looking good. Station 22A, Raphael transmitted. We have you visual and on radar, standing by for final approach authorization. 22A, station. Commander Volkov's accent was thick, but his English clear. You are cleared for approach, and welcome. We are very curious to meet you and discuss your traveling companion. Looking forward to it, station. The final approach took 20 minutes of careful maneuvering, Raphael using the capsule's reaction control thrusters to creep closer to the ISS's docking port with millimeter precision. When the capture latches finally engaged with a satisfying thunk, Dana verified hard dock and opened the pressure equalization valves. Houston, 22A. We have hard dock with ISS. Copy, 22A. Congratulations on a textbook approach. They waited for the pressure to equalize, then opened the hatch and pulled themselves through into the station. Commander Volkov was there to greet them, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile as he shook their hands in the peculiar zero-gravity fashion of gripping wrists. Welcome, welcome. We have watched your journey with great interest. This object that follows you, it is most unusual, yes? That's one way to put it, Raphael agreed. Volkov led them to the cupola, where 2 other crew members had assembled a collection of cameras and scientific instruments. Through the 7 windows, they had a commanding view of Earth below and the space around the station. And there, clearly visible against the blue backdrop of the Pacific Ocean, was the sphere. From this angle, 14 kilometers above it, the object looked smaller but no less mysterious. Its surface reflected the sunlight in patterns that shifted and flowed like liquid metal. And even through the station's windows, Raphael could feel that sense of presence, of being watched by something vast and patient. We have been observing it since you first reported, Volkov said, gesturing to a laptop displaying a series of time-stamped photographs. It maintains perfect position relative to your capsule, not to station. This suggests it is tracking you specifically, or your vehicle. We attempted radar ranging, same as you. No return signal. It is like ghost. A very solid ghost, Dana murmured, snapping photos through the cupola windows. They spent the next hour documenting the sphere from the station's vantage point, using every camera and sensor system available. The ISS's sophisticated optics captured details that had been invisible from the capsule's more limited viewpoint. Close-up imagery revealed that the sphere's surface wasn't uniformly smooth. There were subtle patterns etched into the metallic skin, geometric designs that might have been functional or decorative or something else entirely. Look at this, one of the ISS crew members said, a Japanese astronaut named Tanaka. He'd been analyzing the photos on his computer. These surface patterns, they're fractal. Same structure repeated at multiple scales like coastlines or snowflakes, natural fractal geometry. Or designed to mimic natural geometry, Dana suggested. Camouflage that works at any magnification. Perhaps, but why camouflage something so obviously visible? It was a good question, and none of them had a good answer. The sphere made no attempt to hide itself from optical observation, yet it remained invisible to radar. It followed their capsule openly, maintaining a constant position that couldn't be missed, yet its origin and purpose remained utterly opaque. Raphael was about to suggest they try different sensor types when Houston's voice crackled through the station's comm system. ISS, Houston. Be advised, we're tracking multiple ground-based radars attempting to acquire the object. Military assets from 4 different nations. None are getting returns, but the interest level is increasing significantly. Volkov's expression grew serious. This is becoming diplomatic problem, yes? Unidentified object in orbit, everyone wants to know what it is. That's affirmative, station. Which is why we're holding to the compressed timeline. 22A needs to undock in 45 minutes. The message was clear. Get Raphael and Dana back on the ground before this situation escalated into something that couldn't be quietly managed. Already, too many people knew about the sphere. Too many nations were taking an interest. Every minute it remained in orbit was another minute for rumors to spread, for questions to be asked that NASA wasn't prepared to answer. They spent the remaining time transferring data, copying every photo and sensor reading the ISS had captured onto secure drives that would return to Earth with the capsule. Volkov and his crew asked questions, probing for details that might explain the sphere's behavior, but Raphael had no answers that satisfied them. All he could do was describe what he'd observed and admit that it was beyond his understanding. Too soon, it was time to leave. They said their farewells, returned to the capsule, and began the undocking sequence. As the capture latches released and the station's robotic arm gently pushed them away, Raphael looked back at the crew members watching from the cupola windows. They were waving, but their faces showed the same mixture of fascination and unease he felt in his own gut. 22A. Houston. You are clear of station. Begin departure sequence when ready. Raphael fired the thrusters, slowly increasing their separation from the ISS. As they backed away, he kept his eyes on the sphere, wondering if it would follow them or remain behind with the station. The answer came quickly. The object began moving almost immediately, adjusting its trajectory to maintain formation with the departing capsule. It's still with us, Dana confirmed, watching the navigation display, matching our velocity changes. Copy, 22A. We see it, continuing to track. They executed a series of small burns over the next hour, lowering their orbit in preparation for the final deorbit maneuver. Each time, the sphere matched them perfectly, never falling behind, never getting ahead. It was committed to its escort mission, whatever that mission was, following them all the way down to their final moments in space. As they passed over the Indian Ocean on their 23rd orbit since first observing the sphere, Houston updated them with the deorbit plan. The burn would last nearly 3 minutes, long enough to slow their orbital velocity to the point where Earth's gravity would pull them down into the upper atmosphere. After that, it would be a fiery descent through thickening air, protected by their heat shield, until the parachutes deployed and lowered them gently into the Pacific. 22A, this is flight. I want to prepare you for something. When you execute the deorbit burn, you're going to drop out of orbital velocity. You'll be falling, essentially, on a ballistic trajectory. The object has stayed with you through every maneuver so far, but atmospheric entry is different. It can't follow you through that unless it has heat shielding and a very robust structure. You're saying it might not be able to follow us down, Raphael said. Correct. This could be where you and your companion part ways. Dana looked at Raphael, and he saw his own conflicted feelings reflected in her eyes. They'd spent 18 hours with the sphere, watching it, wondering about it, growing accustomed to its patient presence. The idea of leaving it behind felt strange, almost like abandoning something that had put its trust in them. But they had no choice. The mission was over, and Earth was calling them home. Understood flight, standing by for deorbit burn. They strapped in, securing themselves against the seats that would become necessary again once gravity reasserted itself. Dana ran through the final checklist while Raphael oriented the capsule for the burn, pointing the main engine in the direction of travel so its thrust would slow them down. "Mark in 30 seconds, Houston called. Raphael took one last look through the viewport at the sphere. It held position, steady and silent, its surface gleaming in the harsh sunlight. For just a moment he thought he saw something flicker across that metallic skin, a pattern of light that might have been reflection, or might have been something more deliberate. A farewell, an acknowledgement, or just his imagination finding meaning where none existed. Mark in 10, 9, 8. The countdown continued, mechanical and inevitable. Raphael placed his hands on the controls, ready to monitor systems during the burn, ready to take manual control if anything went wrong. 3, 2, 1, ignition. The engine fired, and suddenly they had weight again. Not much, just a fraction of Earth's gravity. But after days of weightlessness, it felt like being pressed into the seat by an invisible hand. The capsule shuddered slightly as fuel pumped through the combustion chamber at high pressure, generating the thrust that would bring them home. Raphael kept his eyes on the instruments, watching the velocity decrease as planned, but Dana was at the window, watching the sphere. "It's not following," she said quietly. "It's holding position. We're pulling away." The burn continued, eating away at their orbital velocity, pulling them inexorably toward the point where orbit ended and fall began. Through the window, the sphere grew smaller as the distance between them increased, but it didn't attempt to match their maneuver this time. It simply watched them go, maintaining its altitude, its own orbit undisturbed by their departure. "Burn complete," Raphael announced. "Delta V achieved. We're on the re-entry profile." "Copy, 22A. Welcome home. You'll hit entry interface in approximately 8 minutes. 8 minutes. That was all the time they had left in space, the final moments before Earth's atmosphere reached up and grabbed them, before physics and chemistry and thermodynamics conspired to turn their kinetic energy into heat and violence and noise. Raphael glanced back at the viewport one last time. The sphere was just a bright point now, indistinguishable from stars except for its position against the blue curve of Earth. As he watched, it began to move, not toward them but away, climbing higher into orbit with smooth acceleration that spoke of effortless power. "It's leaving," Dana said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been sadness. "Headed for higher orbit." They watched as the sphere accelerated, its velocity increasing beyond anything their capsule could match even with full tanks and unlimited time. It moved like it had been released from a constraint, like it had been waiting patiently for this moment to resume its true purpose. Within 30 seconds, it had vanished from sight, climbing toward the realm of geosynchronous satellites and beyond. "Houston, 22A. The object has departed our vicinity. Last visual showed it accelerating to higher orbit at approximately 10 meters per second squared. We've lost sight of it. Copy, 22A. We're attempting to track on ground-based sensors, but negative contact. It's gone dark. Must have moved beyond our detection envelope." Or it had simply decided to stop being visible, Raphael thought. If it could hide from radar, perhaps it could hide from optical tracking too when it chose. Perhaps they'd only seen it because it wanted to be seen, and now that phase of the encounter was over. The entry interface warning tone sounded, alerting them that the first wisps of atmosphere were beginning to brush against the capsule's hull. Raphael secured his helmet and double-checked Dana's as well, making sure they were ready for the violence to come. Houston, 22A. Entry interface in 30 seconds. See you on the other side. Copy, 22A. We'll be waiting. And, gentlemen, ladies, you did good work up there. Whatever that thing was, you documented it better than anyone could have asked. Then there was no more time for words. The capsule hit the upper atmosphere at 8 kilometers per second, and the universe became fire and noise and vibration as air resistance transformed their velocity into heat. The windows showed a brilliant orange glow, plasma sheeting off the heat shield, temperatures outside reaching thousands of degrees. Raphael felt every second of it, the deceleration pressing him into his seat with forces that made his body feel like lead. But the capsule held together, the heat shield did its job, and gradually the violence subsided as they slowed and dropped into the thicker air below. The drogue chute deployed with a sharp jolt, then the main chutes, and suddenly they were floating gently toward the ocean, swaying beneath orange and white canopies that looked impossibly delicate but held them safe. Through the window, Raphael could see the recovery ships converging on their position, helicopters already airborne and heading their way. In less than an hour, they'd be extracted from the capsule, checked by medical personnel, and transported back to land where a bureaucracy full of questions waited. But for now, in these final moments of the mission, he allowed himself to look up at the sky, searching for any sign of the sphere. There was nothing, just blue and clouds, and the distant glint of an airliner passing far overhead. "Do you think it's still watching us?" Dana asked. "Maybe, probably. I don't think it came all this way just to spend 18 hours with us and leave. What do you think it wanted?" Raphael considered the question as the ocean rose up to meet them. "I think it wanted to see us, to observe how we work, how we fly, how we behave in our element. We spend so much time looking up, searching for signs of life out there. Maybe someone looked down and decided to see what we're like up close." The capsule hit the water with a splash that rattled their teeth, then bobbed to the surface, rocking in the gentle swells. Recovery divers were already in the water, securing flotation collars around the spacecraft. Within minutes, a helicopter winched them up, dripping and grinning despite their exhaustion. As they lifted away from the bobbing capsule, Raphael took one last look at the sky. Somewhere up there, beyond the clouds and the thin blue line of atmosphere, the sphere was continuing its journey. Whether it would return to wherever it came from, or remain in Earth orbit watching and waiting, was a question he couldn't answer. But he knew one thing with certainty: they weren't alone out there. And now, after Elio 22A, NASA knew it too.